É aqui. Isto é muito hip hop, meu. Hard hitting hip hop.
He knows who you are and what's going on, what we're chatting about.
Yes, I'm Richards. I teach the largest race, culture, and ethnicity class in the world. Probably we have about 800 students every semester, and been doing it for 30 years. 30 years, 3 decades at Penn State University. I'm in the sociology department, and
sociólogo.
for a hot minute I was an adjunct in the African American Studies department. Taught a class on race inequalities for about 12 years, an upper division course. But this class that I teach is kind of half U.S. issues and half international issues.
Sure.
So we're kind of really all over the place, and I'm very much a generalist. So I know a little bit about a lot. I know just enough about things to get me into trouble if I say too much.
Gotcha.
Because the experts step in, kind of like you, actually, right? Then the experts step in and they all say like, hey, you've overstepped. You're punching above your weight, so to speak.
Yeah.
Hey, that's funny.
So,
regardless of how you feel about the book, because I know there's a lot of fair criticism, but I didn't realize there was such a huge divide academically between like generalists and specialists until I read that Guns, Germs, and Steel book. I'm sure you've heard of it, yeah? Yeah. And there are fair criticisms of it, but it was funny how much sometimes things would seem to come down to like, if you don't have specialties in this area, you just have no business talking about it. And then other people say, well, generalists are good because they can weave these narratives that everybody can understand, and like it's important to be able to tell the whole story. And then people say, well, they always get these details wrong, and it fundamentally changes things. And those fights are interesting. Yeah.
Academics, we get lost. Listen, the only cred that we have, really, in a certain sense, to a degree. Now, I'm going to take a big critique here, so I'm going to take a big swing.
Sure.
Okay. But a lot of us don't have a lot of value, right? The Earth, if we all went away, the life's going to keep going, right? As opposed to, people that work on sewage systems and electricians and this sort of thing, right? The people who really can keep things functioning, like when it all breaks down, nobody's going to need the sociologist, right, to sit around and analyze how things go. So, but one of the places where we get credibility is having a lot of kind of pedantic information about very small things, right? That maybe they matter in our field, which might mean to like a half dozen other people in the world. It could mean 60, it could mean 160, but so something like that. I mean, what Diamond did was come along and offer a really innovative, very unique perspective and kind of tying everything together.
Yeah.
And then what he does is he gives lots of other people a place, a new starting point. It's like cliff diving, right? If you keep diving off the same cliff, you're just going to have the same experience. But what he did was say, hey, wait, check out all these other cliffs over here and take a dive, take a jump, see what happens. And so, but the people who have spent 30 years studying the minutiae, right, that for them, like, they didn't, and nobody, they weren't on PBS, right? They didn't have a bestseller. They didn't have any of that. And so then they get their feathers all ruffled kind of thing. So.
It's kind of funny because I've seen there's like a parallel debate almost. They seem unrelated, but I think they're very similar. For a while, people going into STEM fields, especially computer-oriented people, the idea is that like, I don't need an English class. I don't need to know how to write stupid papers or whatever. I just need to be able to do my job really well. And then I think we've kind of realized as time goes on, well, actually, being able to communicate with your boss or other people is actually kind of important. It's okay to be a little bit more well-rounded. You're not just a cog in a machine who just has to program. Like, these other skills are good. But I feel like I would like to levy the same criticisms at academics. One of my biggest frustrations is you'll get these people that will come out and they'll be like, you'll get like, maybe like a pop philosopher like Sam Harris, or maybe kind of like pop psychology, arguably for Jordan Peterson. I don't know if I'd go as far as saying like pop psychology, but you'll get these people that will throw their hat in the ring who have these like ideas, and then all of the academics will come out to criticize them. Well, this was wrong, that was wrong. It's like, okay, well, why don't you guys do anything to communicate these ideas? It's so frustrating that there were some ideas that were so pervasive for so long. Are you familiar with the concept of race realism?
Que giro.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was one, and it's like, I don't like that I'm the guy that has to be out here debating it because, oh my God, these topics are unbelievably complicated, you know. And I'm trying to watch like 12-hour courses on. He teaches so many good biology courses. And now I can't even remember his name. But like I'll try to like watch through all this stuff, and there's so much information. It's like I wish that like the people that actually study this professionally would come out and like make statements on this or give good breakdowns or good reasoned arguments about why these things are happening or not happening, rather than just coming out and saying like, oh well, race realism is wrong. It's like, okay, that argument might have worked 20 years ago, but it's not. Sapolsky, is who I was thinking. That's not good enough anymore. Like you need to actually step into the ring instead of just getting mad that everybody else is doing it. You know.
Well, you know, again. I think there are probably a lot of reasons for that. Many of the reasons are rooted in ego.
Ai que merda, Extreme
Storm. We don't have a lot going on necessarily, right? Like, mostly nobody, in a larger society, people aren't
menos mal.
Knocking down our doors to get us to come talk to them.
Aí já me fodi, Toga. Eu não tenho toxic. Tenho aqui toxic suppressor.
Or you know, so people pay attention. You know, there's an article in the New York Times or something covering them, and kind of in a broad, more general way. You know, people just naturally feel some kind of way about that.
Sure.
And I get it, right? But at the same time, you know, I'm very much with you. I just feel like the older I get, you know, by either by chance or because I really planned it this way, and I'm not really sure
não é morrer, mas não vou estar nada bem aqui.
But I feel like I've acquired a bit of wisdom along the way, and that wisdom mostly comes through comparing and contrasting lots of different fields of study and lots of different information. So if I'm reading about insects, or I'm reading about human beings, or I'm reading about, you know, like some of the stuff we're going to discover from the James Webb Telescope,
toxic damage.
It's all going into the same place. It's going into this big head here, and it's going to kind of get, you know, knocked around a little bit, and I'll have better thoughts about the field that I actually study. You know, so.
Okay, toxic suppressor, fish.
At the same time, you know, I have an interesting thing going on. By the way, am I talking too much?
No.
Like you want?
You're good, go.
All right.
This is they listen to me talk all the time.
Coisa deixa de funcionar, acho que é engraçado.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mas o carro parou.
You know, I've had this experience with Korea where I've become
Ficaram a meio do caminho?
that a lot of folks in Korea are listening to.
É só gajo que eu curto falar com sociólogo, prof de sociologia.
Right?
Dava jeito. Eu estava há bocado a dizer que estava triste porque, ou deixa-me triste que isto é um prof de sociologia e de certeza que a conversa vai ser fixe. No entanto, se eu passar à Maria que está a estudar psicologia, aposto que ela não vai ver. Esse tipo de coisas deixa-me cedo. Não sei se foi sozinho ou porque o meu pai assim decidiu, mas o carro parou, sim. Mas tu ias no carro? Eu não, essa é a parte que eu não... Ele foi fazer o teste, mas estava sozinho, estava acompanhado, estava... Mas é sobre... É sobre o quê? Bem, o título diz Modern Day Campus, que está muito a cringe, já conheci pessoal assim até. Pop Psychology. Nem sei quem é que faz isso, Pop Psychology. E Cops, polícias, não sei. Eu gostava de explicar, mas quem me contou isto foi a minha mãe, que tem tanto interesse em carros que nem sabe explicar o que aconteceu. Deixou de dar, não é? Amigo, isto não dá. Ai. Para eu ir buscar com o Clio. Ele foi sozinho. Então ele depois lá chamou o quê? O reboque ou assim? Provavelmente. E depois lá foram fazer o teste. Ai. Tá bem. Mas já voltou a casa? Já muitos testes não demoram muito, acho eu. Especialmente que eles agora não estão a fazer PCRs. Os PCRs... KO. Vai fazer um teste igual ao que fez em casa e vai com sorte. E já vai com muita sorte. Foi há 10 minutos atrás, ok. E a tua mãe saiu agora, é isso? E achas que o teu pai... Tu não andas no carro do teu pai, não é? Mas... Nem no teu, quanto mais no teu pai. Mas achas que o teu pai é tipo... Porque às vezes essas coisas vais sentindo no carro, tipo... tipo, um mês o carro está a andar assim esquisito e tal. Havia algum sintoma ou, nem, ou foi mesmo do nada? Pois, normal. Pois não andas no carro. Nem ele se queixou nunca na... Tipo ao jantar. Quando o pessoal fala. Tá bem, olha. Vai dizendo... Dando updates.
There are specialists about Korean. I say this all the time to Korean audiences. Like, listen, you know, there are certain questions you can't really ask me because there are specialists out there who've been studying Korea for 30 and 40
pois, mas
years.
pode ter sido
you
uma...
ask
Ok.
them these kinds of questions. But what
Pois,
I do, I can...
Não sabemos ao certo o que foi, mas imagina que uma parte, muitas vezes a parte eletrónica pode fechar partes mecânicas, tipo... Imagina qualquer coisa em direção assistida fodeu-se, mas tipo, acabou, bloqueio o volante. Não sei, posso estar errado, mas às vezes tem esse tipo de influência, não é? Se bem que a direção assistida não é eletrónico, que eu me lembro. Olha, não sei, não percebo assim tanto de carros. Receitou Bluetooth para o telemóvel, ok. Mas às vezes é um bocado isso, não é? Mas pronto.
I can give you a perspective on Korean culture that comes from my study and my understanding of cultures all over the world and my travel, you know, that I've spent time all over the world. And so I can give you a perspective of what's going on right now in Korea from comparing what's happening in Nigeria or what happened in, you know, with Bollywood in the 80s or you know, Latin America or the Middle East and, you know, this kind of thing. So I give you just enough and I give you what I think are some really interesting ideas. But if you want me to go too deep, I can't go there. That's not what I do. That's not my specialty.
É aqui que se arranja Storm Crystals.
But you know, for me, I can own that. You know, like I think it's important.
Stormy Planets. Já viste que é a
What is
primeira
the
vez?
commentary that you're doing related to Korea?
Já viste que é a primeira vez que eu estou num planeta assim?
Well, like
cool.
Hallyu and the Korean wave. And
planeta
really
todo de
understanding
tempestades.
the wave and the development, the sort of expansion or the expression of Korean culture all over the world.
Vou fazer uma base aqui, não é?
Started, you know, really started
Olha peixinhos
very
voadores.
slowly about 40 years ago, but it really very much took off in the past 10 or 15 years. So K-pop,
Peraí, eu consigo chamar
K-drama, K-film,
Minotaur?
K-cuisine, K-everything.
Ou tenho que criar um novo?
And wow, Korea is just blown up. You know, the Korean economy, Korean politics, Korean everything. I mean, it's phenomenal. You know, so it starts with, you know, a band like BTS, which is arguably the most popular, you know, performance artist who ever existed on Earth. Right?
É que o Minotaur é
like, wow, you know. Like,
é tipo um Mac.
Nobody would
É
think
giro.
that, but
Mini Mac.
E
a cena é que o gajo é resistente a tudo. Tive a ver a descrição do.
Years ago, I made a statement
é resistente a toxicidade e fogo.
Just kind of randomly got picked up in Korea and kind of took off, and then I started talking more about
O teu pai se tem enervado?
studying Korea for 30 years.
A sério, ele não lida bem com o carro, com cenas assim, tipo.
Okay.
But that's my take on.
Tipo chatices inesperadas assim.
I think I have some really interesting things to say in sort of a broad way, right? Comparing and contrasting. But if you ask me to go too deep, I can go deep as well, but I'm not going to go deep in the place where you maybe want me to go deep. I'll go deep somewhere else. But that's where the uniqueness comes in. So that's like, you know, listening to you, right? I was listening to the debate you did on Ukraine.
Oh, okay.
And I thought, Yeah, and I've been studying. I've been to Ukraine. I've been studying Russia since I was studying the Soviet Union in the early 1980s. I was going to be a Soviet scholar at one point.
Algo no carro rebentou. Foda-se.
Um,
Quando se ouve um barulho assim é
listening to what you
tipo
were
pneu.
saying, and what you were saying were
Arrebentou.
actually a few really. There were many interesting things that you said, but you said a few really, really innovative things.
Ah, mas a tua mãe não estava lá.
Well, okay, that was cool right there, and I don't remember what they were. But the point is, you're not a scholar of this, right? Like it's not what you do 24/7. And so you came at this in such a really interesting way, and I thought, okay, that's the value. But you're also a thinker, right? So, you
try
can
to be
just
sometimes.
apply your. Yeah. Well, you are. I mean, you're thoughtful, right? So so you're able to kind of take an innovative approach to something. So, well, what if we thought about it like this, right? And then you make a statement.
Isso é importante.
And mind you, if you're an academic, you don't do that. Right, you got to be really careful about that because you got about 100 other people watching you, going like, oh, "Okay, hang on, we're ready to assess and give you an answer to that." Whereas you're in a, and I'm not, I'm going to use this word, but I mean it in the best of ways because I apply it to myself. You're in a way kind of naively saying like, "What if we look at it like this?" Right?
O exame estava marcado para que horas? Tipo 2:30 assim? Não. Eles tipo quê? 3 no máximo estão em casa, não é? De volta. Sem marcação. Quando foi comigo, foi com a marcação. Pela... Como é que se chama aquilo? Eu ia dizer IFP. Como é que se chama? Não sei. A coisa da saúde. DGS. Opa, é assim, quando... É assim, o processo normal é... Tu vês que tens Covid e ligas para a DGS. Eles dão-te instruções e em princípio marcas uma coisa no centro de testes. Não, eles mandam-te ir testar. Em princípio marcas. Mas marcar tem a ver com o centro de testes, não tem a ver com o SN24. Ou seja, o teu pai escolheu um sítio, em princípio. E esse sítio, e depois marcar ou não marcar ou whatever, está à responsabilidade desse sítio. Ou ao critério desse sítio. A DGS só te dá uma lista, ou o SNS ou whatever, só te dá uma lista de sítios para tu marcares. Para tu fazeres o teste. Estou a dizer aqui ao pessoal que estou com o período. Yeah. E depois, mas eu não me lembro deles, sei lá, fazerem mais nada. Só deve ficar registado para depois os timings das coisas, para depois eles te informarem, tipo, já passou X tempo, já podes tirar a vacina. Ou tens imunidade durante... Não é imunidade, mas assim, és considerado como se fosses vacinado ou uma coisa assim quando tens... quando estás lá registado como teres tido Covid. Tipo a recuperação. Nunca mais voltamos ao normal. Eu diria que a coisa está a normalizar. O pessoal já está a fazer vidas não muito diferentes do que tinham. Pelo menos, olha, por exemplo, fui ao supermercado, sei lá, não sei, parece-me tudo normal. Ou ao parque também. Só quando apanhas o Covid é que é um bocado, não sabes bem o que é que vai acontecer. Ou vai custar, ou Vai ser tranquilo, sei lá. Ora bem, passou a Storm. Mas ficaram Storm Crystals, acho que eles são caros para caralho. Olha, como é que eu faço? Como é que eu faço para ficar com este cristal? Está escondido. Ups. Eu acho que os cristais os cristais desaparecem todos no com o fim da tempestade. Default para as doenças todas. Aí, achas que o pessoal se deve isolar? Bem, a verdade é que quando é gripes ou constipações ou caralho, alguém sei lá, no escritório apanha e depois tu apanhas e depois a tua família apanha e depois... Não é? Essa é que é a verdade. O pessoal é que... Pronto, no que toca a gripes ou whatever, ninguém quer saber. É tipo, olha, apanhei, já passou. É a única diferença, não é? Sim, por acaso, tipo, isolar-se só um bocadinho, depois faz montes de diferença, porque depois assim, em vez de ser 30 mil pessoas a apanhar, são só tipo, sei lá, 10? I don't know. Mas a melhor parte é mesmo trabalhar a partir de casa, não é? Essa é que é a melhor parte do que veio desta coisa toda. Quero só agradecer. Trabalhar a partir de casa é muito fixe. Anyway, eu vim aqui investigar não sei o que, meu. Mas está aqui uma pedra do conhecimento. Eu acho que não consigo acompanhar aquela conversa que estava a ouvir com este jogo. E se não consigo com este jogo, não consigo com nenhum, certo? Porque tipo, a minha esperança era tipo um jogo chill que é mesmo só dar uns passeios. Percebo o que queres dizer. Quando estava em casa, às vezes tinha um bocado. Tentava um bocado evitar saídas e não sei o que por causa disso. Estava a ser mesmo triste estar a viver naquela casa. Mas era por causa disso também. Que eu evitava sair. Eu vou ficar sem material, meu. Para me proteger. Location service. Oh não, vou ter que voltar à nave. que é isto? É mesmo bonito este planeta. Bonito. Não sei explicar. Se calhar bonito não é a minha palavra, mas... Vá, interessante. Pode. Eu diria que é o main... é o main type. Então, survival, olha. Eu tenho uma... Abaixo da minha cabeça. Da minha câmara, abaixo. Tu tens de estar sempre a dar replay neste oxigênio. Para... Não. Replay neste ao teu survival, não sei o quê. Costuma ser com oxigênio. Pode ser outras coisas. Tens de estar sempre a apanhar items e não sei o quê. Eu diria que o main type provavelmente é survival. E sim, isto podia estar a jogar. Eu podia convidar pessoal para estarmos aqui 2 ou mais pessoas a explorar este planeta, por exemplo. Ou de qualquer, whatever. Um gajo pode fazer um Minecraft. Mas não podes fazer o teu. Que eu saiba, não podes fazer o teu Minecraft server. Ou o Rust server. Ou V-Rising server. Já agora. Estes maninhos estão a ser uns palhaços. Estou a ficar sem thrusters. Podes ficar stranded no espaço ou whatever se não tiveres cuidado. Oi. Era ali os cristais. Isto aqui depois no princípio posso apanhar. Esta merda é mesmo valiosa. Eu não sei onde é que se arranja isto, a não ser Storm coisas. Fogo. Anyway, o que eu vim aqui mesmo investigar era outra coisa. É uma coisa qualquer relacionada com a história. Que eu acho que foi fixe eles terem adicionado história. Eu sei que estes jogos survival games é suposto ser... Não, é só sobreviver, é só aimlessly, tipo, olha... comi, yes. Fiz uma base. Whatever. Se bem que este jogo inicialmente era mesmo meio survival, meio exploração, não sei o que... The game is green, the webcam is normal. Is this the reverse Harry stream? É porque eu não tenho piada, ao contrário dele. Fuck. Treasure that guy, I love him so much. Acho que o facto de não ter uma história é um dos fatores que faz estes survival games uma seca. Pronto, eu acho que eles ao longo do... Isto era suposto ser um survival game e a história... não tinha quase nada, era só vai até ao centro do universo, é a única coisa que dizia. E tipo, era cena típica de survival, mas eles agora, eles depois eventualmente puseram muita coisa, sim, puseram o conceito do anomaly, acho eu, tipo, aqueles characters, vais falando com eles e desenvolvendo e uma narrativa qualquer. E é fixe para quando estás farto de só fazer isto, é tipo, olha, deixa-me ver o que é que aquele gajo quer. E então eu pessoalmente agradeço que eles tenham posto, que tenham acrescentado isso. Acho que o jogo beneficiou com isso. Mas isto, Toga, na prática é um jogo que junta muitos géneros. E eu gosto muito disso. Eu gosto de salganhadas. Ok? Eu gosto de salganhadas. Lembras-te quando eu estava a dizer que... como é que se chama o jogo da Bethesda? O Starfield. Salganhada espacial, yeah. Que é tipo, eles vão tentar... Eles não vão querer focar-se em nada, vão ter muitas coisas. Eu assim em teoria, em princípio, eu gosto disso. E eu acho que este jogo faz isso bem. A cena de... juntar muita merda, estás a ver? Let's go. Se bem que eu acho que no caso do Starfield, eu acho que vai ser um bocado diferente. Eu acho que eles... das duas uma. ou eles têm umas quests do caralho, ou então eu não sei. Porque quests do caralho é a especialidade, ou é aquilo que tu contas que a Bethesda faça, certo? Nos jogos, nos Elder Scrolls, etc. Feels good man indeed, keyframe. Para mim, como pessoa interessada em videojogos e developer, para mim a parte mais impressionante é o que me deixa assim com uma cena assim positiva no peito é o facto destas pessoas terem tido a oportunidade ainda hoje de estar a trabalhar neste jogo e a melhorá-lo, e o jogo está sempre a ficar mais fixe, vai tendo estão sempre a iterar sobre ele e vai ficando cada vez mais com mais coisas para ver e tal, e essa oportunidade é tão fixe, meu. E depois, como é óbvio, isso reflete-se depois no jogo e na percepção das pessoas no jogo, não é? E na experiência. E não aconteceu, não foi cancelado. E é tipo, eu não sei quem é que está olha, vou ser honesto, eu não sei quem é que está a pagar esta merda. Tipo, eu não faço ideia. Porque tipo, eu não sou, certo? Estas cenas geralmente são pagas por pessoal que acredita. Parece que a Hello Games disse, nós queremos fazer, olha, o jogo saiu assim, eu sei que tipo, a recepção não está a ser a melhor, mas tipo, isto foi tudo engano. Se vocês nos derem, se vocês investirem em nós vamos fazer tipo um space game do caralho. E é isso que está a acontecer agora, eu acho. E não sei quem foi que tinha guito, foi tipo, ok, nós acreditamos então, também lá. Tráfico de cocaína. O meu problema é, ou não é o meu problema, é a minha dúvida, porque há partes nesta história que eu não consigo contar, ou não, desculpa, há partes nesta história que eu não consigo supor, que é, alguém dá o dinheiro e às vezes o pessoal dá dinheiro só porque acredita na coisa, não é? Isso para mim é o mais provável. É tipo, quem é que não quer um space game? Pensa naquele jogo, não é? Como é que se chama aquele jogo que é um scam? Que aquele orçamento é tipo... Parece que é um buraco... É um saco... acho que é o Star Citizen. Parece que é um saco sem buraco, meu. Aquele orçamento nunca mais acaba. É quem manda por trás do Star Citizen? Foda-se. Olha, o Star Citizen quer ser muito, muito melhor que isto. Não é? Melhor, quer dizer, quer ser muito mais completo que isto, não é? Online, é quase um segundo mundo, cada pessoa, sei lá, consegue ter land mesmo lá, não é? Ou um planet. Mas tipo, é demasiado ambicioso. Não é? Este jogo, ok, dizendo isto de outra forma, se pensarmos na maneira como é que foi o development deste jogo, eles estão a ter a oportunidade de fazer isto, estão a ter muita sorte e estão a ter a oportunidade de fazer isto num processo iterativo. Um ano sai o update dos veículos, outro ano sai o update das bases, no outro ano sai o update do multiplayer. Não é? Vocês lembram-se do meme do multiplayer no início? É que tipo, esse meme agora já não é meme, agora é real, agora tens mesmo multiplayer. Podes convidar, e é cross-platform, podes convidar quem quiseres, tens quests para multiplayer, tens um spot para encontrares o pessoal todo. E está a ser tipo, cada ano tem uma cena, estás a ver? Com calma, processo iterativo. Não é preciso ser salganhada tudo de uma vez. E onde eu quero chegar com isto é, se o pessoal continuar a dar fund a isto, não sei porque é que haveriam de fazer isso, mas se continuarem a dar fund a este jogo, a pouco e pouco, este jogo transforma-se naquilo que o Star Citizen queria ser. De uma vez. Star Citizen queria fazer isso assim, queria tudo num segundo, certo? E o resultado é o que vocês veem. Nada, não tem nada, claro. Mas é como tudo na vida. Tudo na vida é assim. Quando tu queres fazer tudo de uma vez, não sai nada. Porque não sabes por onde é que has de começar sequer. É demasiado overwhelming. E honestamente, Isto é mais um princípio geral. No caso do Star Citizen em específico, não sei o que é que aconteceu. Muito scam, I guess. Muito scam. Mas este jogo tem o potencial, se continuar a ser developed como está a ser, tem o potencial para chegar ao ponto que o Star Citizen queria ser. Isso eu acho. Mas honestamente já estou feliz com este jogo assim. Mas pronto. Eles o último update melhorou os freighters, que é tipo aquelas naves muito grandes que podem carregar cargueiros, não é? Basicamente. Foi engraçado também. Tenho que aproveitar mais. Já aproveitei só um bocadinho. Cagueiros, yeah. Como é que tens estado, Keyframe? Nunca mais te vi. Nunca mais te vi, pá. Ora bem, eu vim aqui explorar aqui uma coisa qualquer. Lá está, das tais quests. Porque isto não é só andar a mandar cenas. Agora, Toga, continuo a estar convencido que a maneira como o Starfield se vai... Guess what Lenny ouve. É verdade. A maneira como Starfield se tem, na minha opinião, de distanciar deste jogo, porque honestamente eu acho que ele se deveria distanciar deste jogo um bocadinho, é mesmo com a componente da narrativa, que sempre foi o forte da Bethesda. Espero que seja mesmo bom. Não achas? Não sei, eu acho que já sabemos que o gunplay não vai ser nada especial, não vai ter exploração assim nada especial. Bebê, não é? Aquilo tem que ser tipo um livro, meu. Ou seja, eles contam a história e tu na tua cabeça imaginas as coisas mesmo fixe. Estás a ver? É tipo um livro. Isto é a minha... É o que eu acho, não é? Posso estar errado, mas é o que eu sinto. Also, porque é que isto está tudo fodido? É por causa da Storm. Eles foderam o lighting todo nesta sala, meu. Porquê? Daqui a um bocado estávamos juntos ao VC, não vale a pena estarem com saudades. Está bem. Ok, vamos ver o que é que se passa aqui. Será que vai ser um puzzle? If you are listening, you have likely found our final log. I leave this trace as a memory of my fallen friends and a warning to others who may end. By the way, o lore deste mundo é ok. Eu não sou um lore guy. Né? É ok, mas não acho nada especial, atenção. Okay? Se eu tivesse que avaliar. Again, não sou um lore guy. Mas este jogo é mais lore do que história. Se é que faz sentido. Ou tem mais peso o lore do que a história. I cannot deny myself the vain hope that someone may find me. Though I beg you, do not follow. The haunting transmission ends. I notice the stranger has left behind an upgrade module for the aeration membrane. Eu acho que já tenho isso. Ser mais lore do que história, sou environmental storytelling. Quem me dera, mas não é. É mais por texto. É um bocado difícil explicar o lore deste jogo com environmental storytelling. É mais difícil, mas não é impossível. Tanto que existem planetas que fazem isso. Ou seja, o jogo tem muitos tipos de planetas. Alguns são planetas tipo com bugs, cheios de, sei lá, cubos e paralelepípedos assim todos bugged, e bichos que são tipo também eles paralelepípedos e tal. Isso é uma maneira deles fazerem environmental storytelling para explicar uma das partes do lore disto, em que alguns planetas são defeituosos. Isto é tudo uma simulação. Spoiler. Mas é mais texto. É mais no texto que é diferente. I take the upgrade module. Its installation's history contains the serial number of its owner's starship. Os bichos são um Porygon? Um bocado. Quer dizer, Porygon é mais cool. Eu gosto muito do Porygon, por acaso. Saudades do Pokémongas. Perhaps... E gostei das evoluções todas. Até o Z. Perhaps I ought to follow. Wait. What's happening? Underwater protection. Upgrades received. Ok. Opa, tá bem. Eu não vou ter espaço para ele. Eu tenho que meter aqui. Eu tenho que aumentar o meu technology. Os meus technology spaces. Onde é que eu recebi o gajo? O jogo diz-me que eu recebi, mas eu não sei onde é que... Aumentar o meu tech. Aqui, ainda estou a encontrar aí. Portanto, tenho um frictionless pump. Eu tenho que pôr os... está aqui. Sorry. Supremely powerful upgrade for the exosuit aeration membrane. Mas eu não tenho o aeration membrane. Insane on a membrane. Insane in the brain. Tenho só cenas para construir. Ei, deitei fora o silver. Eu deitei fora o silver. Tá bem, tá. Olha, mas eu não quero... o jogo vai-me dizer que eu tenho mesmo que instalar isto? Ui, estou fodido. Epá, eu posso, mas... eu não tenho o aeration membrane. O silver do Sonic 06. It's no use! Upgrade module held an echo of its original user. Ok. Para efeitos desta quest, eu só tenho mesmo que instalar aquilo. Aquilo é um upgrade para uma coisa que eu não tenho, ok, pessoal? Mas o jogo deixa, por isso está-se bem. Let's go. Deixa eu ver se a minha nave... Just in case... a nave tem silver. Nice. Porque isto está cheio de inventory spaces em todo lado. Eu tenho que chamar a nave anyway. Nave, venha me buscar. The toxicity of our city, Portanto, tendo em conta aquilo que eu estava... eu estava a falar um bocado do lore porque estava a pensar, imagina que o Toga queria jogar isto. Provavelmente uma das coisas que o ia impedir de jogar é porque o lore não é assim tão forte quanto isso. Provavelmente. Não chega a ser um jogo com muitas coisas. Strangest Starship. Será que posso dar claim? Au! Fodi-me bem. Não é muito forte na minha opinião. Dreams of the Deep. Depende dos jogos. O Kerbal City Skylines são jogos com zero lore. Pois, mas compensa por outros lados. O Kerbal, eu tive... Acho que é super, como é que eu dizer, estimulante para ti porque tens toda a cena de perceber como é que funciona a física. Ao contrário deste. Este não tem... Não me lembro assim de nada mesmo challenging. Claro que podes escolher modos mais difíceis. Se calhar isso ia curtir mais, não sei. Tipo a cena do... deixa-me pensar. A cena de Permadeath, maybe. A lore é mais forte que a mim. Sim, eu acho que a solução era, se este lore fosse muito forte, acho que se calhar aí já... Quão longe é que isto é? Isto é muito longe. Mas, atenção, isto é só a minha percepção. Eu posso estar errado. Até pode haver alguma coisa neste jogo que te puxa que eu nem sequer descobri. Há muita coisa no base building que eu nem sequer fiz. Tu tens base building subaquático? Eu quero muito explorar isso um dia. Ainda não comecei sequer. Tens exocrafts. e merdas assim. Outra cena que eu te disse logo, que eu fiquei com a impressão de que ia puxar, é que isto tem um bocado de cena de... é uma cena que eu não explorei. Tem um bocado a cena de fábrica, tipo, meter cenas a minar e... Deixa eu ver se eu encontro isso. Não tem aqui nada, sadly. Pois, como eu estou na água, ele só me põe exocenas. Mas tem aqui os marine shelters e tal. Pronto. Tens a cena de, no fundo, fazer uma fábrica e tentar pô-la o mais eficiente possível. É também um dos aspectos que eu não explorei, mas já quando estava a comprar os upgrades, vi que estavam lá. Também podes investir nisso se quiseres. Mas já sabes como é que eu sou mais de passear. Já, mas se bem que eu um dia destes quero mesmo fazer essa cena das fábricas, porque já estou meio caminho andado para isso. Já posso respirar e o caralho. Já estou meio caminho andado para isso com isto, espera aí. Com esta cena. Posso fazer survey aos tipos de coisas para fazer harvest. Já tenho cenas para fábricas mesmo, na medida em que tu tens switches para pôr o power aí para um lado ou para o outro e isto é o quê? Isto é o factório? Mas só experimentando na hora. Vai ser muito mais simples de certeza, mas existe. Desordem, desordem, desordem. Sorry, apetece-me pensar nesta música. Cripto. Cryocenas. Era isto. Como é que isto está? Já nem sequer tenho sódio. Este planeta vai-me gastar os recursos todos, meu. É melhor eu não ficar aqui muito tempo. É que não tarda estou a falecer. Se calhar tem aqui... Cytophosphate. Eu não sei, este planeta é todo muito tóxico, meu. Só deu para a toxicidade. Espera aí. Não tem sódio, mas é rico em samor. Fuck. Tenho que bater os calcanhares das minhas sapatilhas, meu, quando tiverem apuros. Olha, o que é que acham de meter aí uns episódios? Pera. Hold on. Eu estava a ouvir uma coisa mesmo séria, mas não vai dar para ouvir coisas sérias. Por muito que eu goste.
De biscoitos de canela e chá de jasmim. Saí para a rua à procura de Xiaomi.
Floribela Online.
Chegar ao chinês pode inclusive ser o fim. Pedi Xiaomi. Xiaomi.
Ai, a cena do chumbo.
Desculpa, mas este rapaz é um borracho. É um borracho. Ele disse-me já tem namorado. Eu estou muito triste. Podes esperar no meu quintal até ao dia de Natal. Ha! Mas cá de mim não levas nada. Nem é com tua.
Por essa altura o Keyframe já está tipo, ok.
Pode dar?
Ah, mas já tenho o Nautilon. Ah, que merda. Isto é tipo... Mas sabes qual é a melhor parte, Keyframe? O Toga não reparou, meu. Foi mesmo engraçado. Caputa. Quem reparou foi o Smiley. Será que vou ser banido por... Olha, eu quero dar claim a esta chip. Não tenho nada. Aos Janos, mano. Vou ser banido de MCA, meu. Mais uma chip! Isto tem aqui para eu sobreviver? Eu toco xixi. Que é uma porcaria. Já me tinha esquecido que era daí que vinha. Olha, com isto consigo chegar à minha nave, não?
Pois tenho todo o tempo do mundo. O que me sobra cada segundo. Tudo o que tenho é dividido. O melhor da vida são os amigos.
Não tenho nada, mas tenho tudo. Induction Polarizer. A nave assim arranca ou não arranca? Preciso de Pulse Engine para ela arrancar? Hermético Seal. E este solo? One metal plating, ok. Nesse vídeo também contaram a história de quando o gajo que decidiu meter o chumbo na gasolina foi obrigado a snifar um jarro em público para provar que era seguro. Fogo, vocês só estão a informar com coisas fixe. Isso é fixe. Amor verdadeiro. Solo. Preciso de um Carbon Nanotube.
Todas as pessoas que nos acompanharam nestes 10 autógrafos, nada disto tinha sido possível sem vocês. Obrigado, se calhar ficará aquém do que apetece dizer, mas...
Está reparado.
Valeu, pessoal.
A todos, um grande beijinho.
This is a rotting planet.
Pelo vosso carinho. Nós ficamos
É só
muito felizes
carinho.
quando estamos convosco. e obrigada por tudo. Isso que eu agora vos dizer muito, muito obrigada a todos. A todos, 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 sem exceção. Equipas técnicas, equipas aqui de estúdio, de bastidores. Muito obrigado ao público. Muito, muito, muito obrigado.
One guy. É a primeira vez que eu estou a usar uma nave diferente.
Eu só agradeço, do fundo do coração mesmo, e até uma próxima. Beijo.
Olha, o jogo quer que eu faça uma...
A todos os amiguinhos que nos acompanharam até hoje e que nos vão continuar a acompanhar, um beijinho super, hiper, mega grande.
Ei, as naves são diferentes dos cockpits.
Agradeço-vos por tudo. É graças a vocês que nós estamos aqui, que chegamos onde chegamos e queremos continuar a ser vossos amigos para sempre. Continuem sempre connosco.
Mas se calhar podiam ter sido inventadas de outra maneira, não sei. Às vezes penso nessas coisas, meu. Uma pequena merda pode mudar tipo o curso da ciência toda, não é? E depois há coisas que só não mudam por conforto ou interesse ou bababá. Estás a ver? Não é linear, não é só raw tech que influencia o que é que usamos hoje em dia. É muito mais coisa. Muito mais coisas. Eu acho isso insane. O que é que o jogo disse que eu tenho que fazer? Tenho que fazer um Nautilan whatever. Preciso de sal. Crystal Sulfide. Ai, estou-me a vomitar todo. Eu nunca na vida vou fazer encontrar Crystal Sulfide. Metal plating consigo fazer. São 4, não é? Se calhar ia procurar a minha nave. Uma história daquele cientista que resolveu o problema da agricultura mundial inventando o amónio que foi usado para matar carradas de pessoas. Andava o pessoal a mandar vir com os telhados, não é? Ai não, isso era amianto. Ou não? Ei pá, estou errado nisto, de certeza. Foda-se. Isto é uma B-Class. Eu acho que a minha nave é C-Class. A minha main ship. Mas eu quero a minha nave por causa do... Chama-se Reckless Breath. Este cockpit está bem cool. Eu não sabia que eles eram diferentes, mas faz sentido que seja, não é? Ai, como é que até está a minha nave? Está aqui, encontrei-a. Eu cheguei um bocado fodido nisso. Mas eu podia tê-la chamado também. A primeira vez é que tive problema, não conseguia chamá-la, sabem porquê? Não tinha... Os meus launch thrusters não tinham energia, então eu não podia chamar a nave, então fiquei perdido no planeta durante uns tempos. Porque não tinha waypoint para a minha nave, porque tinha feito claim a outra. Foi bem fixe. Olha, isso é um bug não, mas é uma cena que eu não resolvia, porque foi mesmo fixe estar perdido e estar em pânico. Não sei quanto a vocês, mas eu curti. Espera, o meu hyperdrive está deste lado. Pois. Ammonia, olha aqui ammonia. Fritz Haber, o dude dos químicos. Vocês têm algum vídeo, sem ser Floribela, para meter? Falar sobre isso? Digam aí, eu meto no pip.
The 1918 Nobel Prize for Chemistry is probably the most important Nobel Prize ever awarded. It was given to German scientist Fritz Haber for solving one of the biggest problems humanity has ever faced. His invention is directly responsible for the lives of 4 billion people today.
Also,
but when he received his prize, many of his peers refused to attend. 2 other Nobel Prize winners rejected their awards in protest, and the New York Times wrote a scathing article about him. He is simultaneously one of the most impactful and tragic scientists of all time. Perhaps more than any other single person, he has shaped the world we live in today. Part of this video is sponsored by Ren. More about them at the end of the show. If you are an American citizen and you find an island with a lot of bird poop on it, well then you can claim that island for the United States, and the US will have your back. The president is authorized to send in the Navy and the Army to defend your newly discovered poop-covered island. There are currently 10 American islands that were claimed in this way. And even though the law that made this possible was passed in 1856, it is still in effect to this day. So why did people want poop-covered islands so badly? There are a few dozen islands off the coast of Peru where millions of seabirds gather to mate. And the waters near the island are full of fish. And these millions of birds eat the fish, and then they poop. A lot. Since the region is hot and dry, this poop solidifies and accumulates over millennia. There are cliffs of bird poop 30 meters or 100 feet high. Technically, bird poop is called guano, and by the mid-1800s, buying and selling bird guano was big business. The price rose as high as $76 per pound, meaning you could trade 4 pounds of guano for 1 pound of gold. So why was there such a big market for bird poop? Well, to answer that, we have to look inside the human body.
Eu não consigo jogar enquanto ouço isto.
By weight, most of our bodies are made up of oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen. But the fourth most common element is nitrogen. Nitrogen is part of the amino acids that form proteins. It's part of hemoglobin, the compound that carries oxygen in red blood cells. And it's a central component of DNA and RNA. Nitrogen is essential for all life on Earth.
Okay.
We get our nitrogen by eating plants, or animals which have eaten plants. And plants get their nitrogen from the soil. The problem is, if you farm the same soil year after year, you harvest the nitrogen out of it. And eventually, there isn't enough nitrogen for healthy plants to grow. They can't produce enough chlorophyll to photosynthesize, which stunts their growth.
Oh no.
Their leaves turn yellow, and they are more susceptible to pests and disease.
Okay.
Crucially for farmers, nitrogen deficiency means smaller yields. The way to fix this is to add nitrogen back into the soil.
How?
Which is where bird guano comes in. Guano is up to 20% nitrogen.
O tal gajo que resolveu o problema da agricultura.
Years ago, Incan farmers realized that adding guano to their soil made crops grow taller. This is what allowed them to grow food in places that were previously unfarmable and expand their empire.
That's amazing.
South America's rich deposits of
Mas o conceito do... Peraí.
unnoticed by the rest of the world.
Eu estou a falar do guano, que é, é cocó de pássaro, não é? Não percebi. É, não é? Anyway, o conceito de adubo não havia antes? Quando é que começou a entrar o conceito de adubo? Manure. History? The History of Compost? Quando é que se começou a usar? No Egito. O guano é mais eficaz. Pois, começou-se a usar mesmo, mas mesmo muitos milhares de anos. O guano é que é especial. Ok. O meu boneco acho que vai morrer por causa da merda tóxica. Isto não fez pause.
But such was the world's appetite for nitrogen that by 1872, guano was running out, and Peru banned further exports. The world would need another way to get its nitrogen fix. This was a crisis. William Crookes, a British chemist, made a dire prophecy in 1898.
Oh no.
With the world's growing population and dwindling supplies of nitrogen, he said, "We stand in deadly peril of not having enough to eat. In less than 30 years' time," he argued, "people all over the world will be dying of starvation."
Was he wrong? He was probably not wrong.
He also proposed a solution. It is the chemist who must come to the rescue. It is through the laboratory that starvation may ultimately be turned into plenty.
Because here's the thing. Nitrogen isn't rare, it's common. 78% of the air is nitrogen. But it's in a form that plants and animals can't use.
Okay.
2 atoms of nitrogen triple bonded together. This bond is one of the strongest in nature. The way to measure the strength of a chemical bond is by the amount of energy that's required to break it. So, to break apart 2 chlorine atoms, for example, would take 2.5 electron volts. To break apart 2 carbons requires 3.8 eV. 2 oxygens, 5.2 eV. But to break apart 2 atoms of nitrogen requires 9.8 electron volts, a tremendous amount of energy.
There are 2 processes that do this naturally. Lightning releases so much energy it breaks apart N2 into individual nitrogen atoms. They then quickly react to form nitrogen oxides. These molecules stay in the atmosphere until they react with water droplets in clouds and fall to the ground in rain. There are also a few types of bacteria living in soil that
Olha, Toga, deixa-me interromper uma coisa. Comentário sobre este jogo. Que se calhar é porque eu sou anti-survival games ou whatever, não sei. Mas a verdade é que uma coisa que eu sempre quis que os survival games me dessem. Vou tentar exemplificar. Eu sempre quis que os survival games me dessem isto. Suponho que eu quero sal, locate substance. E também, claro, um glossário, mas fixe poder chegar aqui e dizer, não, eu quero procurar isto. Eu acho que é isto que quero procurar. Acho que até é isto que eu quero. E pronto, o gajo está tipo, locate. Se calhar vou-me foder que não tenho neste planeta, o caralho. Mas poder, não é? Vamos ter Crystal Sulfide. Eu não sei o que é isto, sequer. Não é um raw material aquilo. Esperem só um momento. Eu já continuo o vídeo. Só. Deixa eu ver. Crystal. Eu já tenho os blueprints para todos os cenas. Os cristais ou whatever. Já me fodi, não sei. Não sei onde é que vou arranjar aquele cristal. Aquele cristal balele.
Break the N2 bond using a tremendous amount of energy.
Yeah, isso, mas é uma cena que eu não gosto tipicamente nos survival games, que são tipicamente.
But bacteria only replenish the nitrogen slowly, and there's not enough lightning to produce nitrogen compounds at scale. So chemists tried.
In 1811, Georg Hildebrandt mixed nitrogen and hydrogen in a sealed flask, trying to make ammonia, one of the nitrogen-containing molecules found in guano. When that didn't work, he submerged the flask 300 meters underwater to increase the pressure. That didn't work either, but he was on the right track.
Increasingly sophisticated versions of these experiments were carried out over the following 100 years. All of them failed.
So when Fritz Haber became interested in this problem in 1904, he was joining a long line of failed chemists. He was 36 years old, working as a low-level academic at the University of Karlsruhe.
Imagina salvar o mundo com 36 anos.
With a 2-year-old boy named Hermann and a wife, Clara, who was one of the first women to get a PhD in chemistry. Driven by pride and competition with another scientist, Haber spent 5 years on the problem. His idea was to combine nitrogen and hydrogen not only at high pressure, but also at high temperature, and in the presence of a catalyst, something that lowers the amount of energy required to split diatomic nitrogen. To do this, new experimental apparatus had to be invented.
Não sei fazer aquele cristal, vou ter que ir à wiki, não é mesmo? Perdi o jogo.
That could tolerate ever higher temperatures and pressures.
He also got lucky. At the time, he was moonlighting as a technical consultant for a light bulb manufacturer. So there he had access to lots of really hard-to-find materials, like the element osmium.
Osmium is rare. In his day, there was only about 100 kilograms of the refined metal in existence. But the company he worked for was experimenting with using it for filaments in their light bulbs, so they had most of the world's supply. Haber suspected it might make the perfect catalyst, so he brought a sample back to his lab. And there, in the 3rd week of March 1909, Haber placed his sheet of osmium in the pressure chamber. And then he pressurized and heated the nitrogen and hydrogen to 200 atmospheres and 500 degrees Celsius. Under these conditions, the triple bonds broke apart, and nitrogen reacted with hydrogen. Of the total gas mixture, 6% turned into ammonia. When the gas was cooled, 1 milliliter of ammonia dripped out the end of a narrow tube into a beaker. An elated Haber rushed from one lab to another, yelling, "Come on down! There's ammonia!" Germany's biggest chemical company, BASF, commercialized Haber's process. Within 4 years, they had opened a factory in Oppau, producing 5 tons of ammonia per day. People spoke of making bread from the air. With the fertilizer from this industrial process, on the same plot of land, farmers were able to grow 4 times as much food. And as a result, the population of the Earth quadrupled. There's a good chance you owe your life to Haber's invention.
Thank you.
The Earth supports 4 billion more people today than it could without nitrogen fertilizer. In fact, around 50%
That's pretty good.
of the nitrogen atoms in your body came from the Haber process.
É agora que o vídeo vai ficar
Invention
triste,
made
certo?
Fritz Haber a wealthy man. He got a promotion, becoming the founding director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physical Chemistry in Berlin. He also befriended some of the best scientists of his day, including Max Planck, Max Born, and Albert Einstein. After Einstein separated from his first wife in 1914, he stayed the night at Haber's house. But if Haber was so well regarded, why was he shunned by colleagues when he won the Nobel Prize? Well, it all comes down to what happened in World War I. When the war broke out, Haber volunteered for military duty. Unlike pacifist Einstein, who denounced the war, Haber was a patriot, He wanted to use his expertise to help his country. Only a few months into the war, the German army was already running out of gunpowder and explosives. Ammonium nitrate, besides being an excellent fertilizer, is also an explosive. Just look at what happened in Beirut in August of 2020.
Xiça.
A warehouse containing almost 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate caught fire.
Never again.
And in the extreme heat, the fertilizer detonated. The blast, which could be heard hundreds of kilometers away, killed at least 217 people and injured thousands more. Seismometers registered an artificial earthquake measuring 3.3 on the Richter scale. This is just one of many fertilizer-related explosions. The Oppau plant, where Haber's process was first put into practice, would also explode in 1921. And the reason is nitrogen. We've already seen that it takes a tremendous amount of energy to break apart nitrogen's triple bond. But the flip side of that coin is that when two nitrogen atoms come together and form that bond, a huge amount of energy
Será que esse pessoal só estava vivo porque ele resolveu o problema da agricultura? Esse pessoal que ele depois matou sem querer também. He's playing God, dude.
And the formation of that triple bond is where these chemicals derive much of their explosive energy. Haber lobbied to convert the factories using his process to make ammonia for fertilizer to create nitrate for explosives instead. His superiors believed such a conversion to be impossible, but Haber persisted, and soon his chemical process was at the heart of the German war machine. From bread out of the air to bombs out of the air. But Haber thought chemistry could make an even bigger contribution to the war. In December 1914, he witnessed a chemical weapons test. He was unimpressed. Haber believed that he could do better. He set out to make a gas that was deadly at low concentrations and heavier than air, so it would sink into enemy trenches. Projectiles carrying chemical weapons were banned, at least in theory, by the Hague Convention of 1899. But in practice, after the start of the war, Germany, France, and Britain
mais do lado das vidas. Parece-me que ele mudou mesmo o mundo.
Haber converted his wing
Isso é o sonho de qualquer cientista.
chemical weapons laboratory, and after only a few months of work, he zeroed in on chlorine gas. An employee, Otto Hahn, expressed his discomfort about the new weapon. Haber told him, innumerable human lives would be saved if the war could be ended more quickly in this way.
É sempre a mesma desculpa.
At 6 p.m. on the 22nd of April, with the wind blowing toward the Allied trenches, German troops released 168 tons of chlorine from over 5,000 gas cylinders. The wall of gas advanced across the battlefield. Since chlorine gas is 2.5 times heavier than air, it sank into the trenches of the Allied soldiers. Any soldier that inhaled a lungful of the gas suffered a terrible death.
Jesus.
Chlorine irritates the mucous lining of the lungs so violently that they fill with liquid.
E tem que ser armazenado de maneira diferente, provavelmente. Não é aquilo, é hazard do caralho, não?
More than 5,000 Allied soldiers died this way in the first attack. Haber was promoted to the rank of captain, and a week later he was back home in Berlin. On the 1st of May, the Habers hosted a dinner party, and after the party wound down, Fritz took sleeping pills and went to bed. But that night, his wife Clara took his gun and went outside into the garden. And there she fired a single shot into her chest. Her 12-year-old son Herman heard the shot and ran outside to find his mother as she lay dying.
That's fucked.
The next morning, Fritz Haber was on a train to the Eastern Front to supervise a gas attack on the Russian army.
Some have claimed Clara
Exemplo isolado de Leia Romano.
because of her husband's obsession.
Ou a tal cena naquele país, como é que se chama? Berlim? Não é Berlim.
Honestly, we
Beirut.
don't know because no first-hand accounts survive that support this interpretation. What we do know is that Clara was deeply unhappy in her marriage. In 1910, after being married for 8 years to Fritz, she wrote to a friend, "What Fritz has won during these 8 years, that and still more I have lost. And what remains ahead of me fills me with the deepest dissatisfaction." After Clara's suicide, Haber spent the rest of the war running his institute, researching chemical weapons, gas masks, and pesticides. By 1917, the institute employed 1,500 people, including 150 scientists. It was like a mini Manhattan Project, but for chemical weapons. In total, 100,000 soldiers were killed by chemical weapons in World War I. When Germany surrendered, Haber was crushed. All the money he made from his ammonia patent was lost to hyperinflation. In an attempt to pay off Germany's crippling war debt, he tried to distill gold from seawater, but the project was futile. In 1933, the Nazis came to power and passed a law that all Jewish civil servants, including scientists, were to be fired from their jobs. Haber was Jewish, but he never practiced the religion. Regardless, his military service exempted him from the law, but he resigned from his role as director in solidarity with all the Jewish scientists who worked at the Institute.
Crystal
the next
sulfide.
year, in a hotel room in Basel, Switzerland, he died of heart failure.
Inventory full nada.
Immediately after World War I, Haber's Institute developed a
Olha, vou
cyanide-based
explodir.
insecticide. It had a barely detectable odor, so they mixed in a foul-smelling chemical to alert people to the danger. The resulting gas was called Zyklon B. A decade after Haber's death, the Nazis requested chemists remove the foul-smelling component. And this form of Zyklon B, the chemical developed at Haber's Institute, was then used to perpetrate the Holocaust.
Jesus. Wait, really?
Thinking about this story, it would be easy to paint Haber as a villain, or as a hero, for inventing the process used to feed half the world. But another approach is to regard him as irrelevant to the larger story, because someone else would have figured out a way to process nitrogen out of the air, and other scientists were developing chemical weapons. Over the past few centuries, science and technology have improved our lives immeasurably, but they have also given us ever-increasing ways to destroy ourselves. I think it'd be great to believe that we could ask scientists to only work on problems that are good for humanity. But the reality is that every bit of information is a potential double-edged sword.
Yep.
You don't know the outcome of your research.
You just have to keep
how
going.
It might later be used.
You have to research.
Ammonium nitrate is both a fertilizer and an explosive. So
Eu não sei quanto a vocês, mas já cheguei a essa conclusão, não é?
how do we keep increasing our knowledge and control of the natural world without destroying ourselves and everything else on this planet in the process? So chemistry has made it possible for 8 billion of us to live on this planet and to have the standard of living that we do. But as a byproduct, we've changed the atmosphere, and now we're suffering the consequences in the form of more frequent and severe heat waves, among other things. Which
We
brings
are
me
going
to
to
an
kill
offer directly from
ourselves.
me to you. I want to offset 1 month of your carbon emissions, and I'll do it with this video's sponsor, Wren. On their website, you can calculate how much carbon you emit
Knowledge
and
is
which
power.
activities have the greatest impact.
We can't handle the
You can
power.
offset your emissions through a monthly subscription. But they don't just plant trees.
That's
One
what
of the
Devil
projects
Gin
they're
is trying to
currently backing
tell
is a
us.
pilot study in Scotland
We
called
cannot handle
Enhanced
such
Mineral
power.
Weathering. So the way it works is they spread small basalt rocks throughout forested areas. And then when it rains, those raindrops contain dissolved CO2 in the form of carbonic acid. And when the rain hits the basalt, it reacts and the pH increases. Now that turns carbonic acid into carbonates, like calcium carbonate, and that precipitates out. So in this solid mineral form, the carbon is trapped, potentially for thousands of years. And this is the kind of chemical innovation we may need to solve the climate crisis. So if you want to join me in offsetting your carbon footprint, then click the link in the description. Wren is completely transparent about where they invest the money, and they'll send you monthly email updates. If you're one of the first 100 people to sign up, I will personally pay for your first month of CO2 offsets.
Personally?
Which is not a standard offer, it is just something I really wanted to do. So I want to thank Wren for sponsoring this part of the video, and I want to thank you for watching.
Hey, thanks, man. That guy's cool. Opa, é mesmo assim. E e a minha opinião é mesmo essa. Tem que se andar para a frente. Para a frente, entre aspas. Pois não é necessariamente para a frente. Oh, what is this? Tem um L tesouro? É pá, tem que deitar coisas fora. Epá, eu gosto de catnip, meu. Andar para fora. Hadalcore? Oh, é um bocado halal isto. Ai ai. Olha, onde é que eu arranjo mais? Que merda, tenho que arranjar mais. Porquê que o jogo não reconhece a existência daquela coisa que eu preciso? Also, isto é uma coisa abandonada? Ah, eu preciso... Espera, eu acho que é isto que eu preciso. Ok, encontrei. Oh, come, please. Eu já tenho medo suficiente sem tu ladrares do nada. Vais jogar qualquer coisa? O que é que vais jogar? Diz lá, diz a verdade. Seja como for, beijinhos, obrigado pela companhia, obrigado pelo vídeo. Tenho que checar mais merdas assim. Jak and Daxter? Wait, hold on. O decompiled version? Also... Tens andado a curtir, é? Boa cena, espero que seja fixe. Ora bem, já posso construir o veículo. Falta-me um metal plating. Ok, já posso construir o veículo. Vai, eu nem quero saber. Espera. Não, não quero saber. É só para o jogo. Para a quest. Eu na verdade Pois, eu estou a fazer isto aqui. Se calhar depois vou fazer summon ou assim. Aliás, é melhor fazer summon agora. Acho que posso. Acho que consigo trazer o meu Freighter here. Aqui. Foda-se. Acho que posso trazer o meu cagueiro, vá. Not enough fuel. Hydrothermal. How do you make a hydrothermal whatever? Ai, que Piso, posso fazer isto? Whatever, can I go now? Que veículo estranho. Test the Nautilus Submarine. Estás a ver? Está a ver, isto aqui... Isto é as quests que são feitas só para tu descobrires as cenas do jogo. Mas eu ia querer fazer isto mais tarde anyway, não era preciso... Também não era preciso isto. Mas está-se bem, olha, aproveito e vou ali ao Distress Beacon. Que eu ia querer mesmo ter uma base. Repeater signal detected. Has detected the broadcast structure. Provavelmente é para aqui. Ok, o jogo quer que eu vá fazer uns passeios. Jack 2 é o que tu gostas. Oh shit. Tens que ver se alguém está a trabalhar nisso ou não. Olha, não faço ideia. Se calhar nos comentários dos vídeos que dão tipo showcase a isto, deve haver logo pessoal a dizer. Ou na descrição assim. Sim, estamos a pensar começar Jack 2. Como assim? Follow the sonar signal. I don't have any sonar. I just build this shit. I don't have anything. I got no crystal sulfide. How do I make a mirror? I need gold and silver. Estão os dois na... Estão os dois na nave. So yeah, I'm kinda fucked. Ups. Eu acredito que isto tivesse o botão de andar depressa. O Go Go Go. Quem é que se lembra do Go Go Go? Do hate mail do Tekken. Anyway, quero continuar a ouvir o sociólogo. Não sei se consigo dar a atenção devida que eu quero dar.
This is like the young, the young mind is very mature, so it's cool. That's the value, I think, of what you do.
Yeah, I definitely, obviously, being who I am, I would agree. The one thing that I wish that more people would recognize for other people that are like me, so these other kind of like, I would, as critical as I am of like alternative media, I would classify myself as essentially being alternative media. I wish that people were more honest about the limitations of that. Like, so in some sense, what you're saying is correct, that like, because of my naivety, I can come at problems in kind of like novel ways or new ways,
Yes.
Sometimes that's really cool, and it might make for like, oh wow, like an outsider saying this, and I would have never thought to think about that like that before. But in other ways, it could be really stupid. Like, well, of course you're considering this because you don't know about this, or that. So I always try to be careful in that, like, well, this is like the limitations of my approach. Like, maybe I can present a new idea or whatever, but keep in mind that, like, without specialist knowledge, like, there might be reasons why, this is something that other people haven't considered. And I tend to err on the side of caution for that because it's a bit arrogant to assume that, like, and people will do this all the time. Like, oh, well, like, this macro econ problem could be fixed so easily. Why doesn't, like, a central bank just do that? And it's like, man, people have been studying macro econ for 50 years and don't. So I try to avoid that because there's a huge level of arrogance that alternative people can pick up, especially if they happen to make 1 or 2 or 3 right predictions, but for all the wrong reasons, they can all of a sudden think that they're gods on earth. So,
yeah, exactly. I think that's well, the beauty is, and I think you know this, well, clearly you do. When you encounter someone who's brilliant, and as you're listening to that person and saying, "Whoa, okay, this is brilliance right here," and I'm not going to reach that, so let me just acknowledge it, and then everything else that comes out of my mouth comes out with a sense of just humility, I guess, right? So I'll throw a few ideas out to talk about this or that or the other thing, but I'm going to do it with a certain humility because the brilliance. When I was 24 years old, I submitted a paper for a conference on Marxism and religion.
No, that's
and
not
it got accepted. And so I went. I was 24. I mean, oh my God, I'm just a little kid, right? And I wasn't born. I went to a working class high school, and I spent the entirety of my high school smoking weed, and I graduated somewhere in the
fucking sociologists, man.
Class, no, hang out in the 20th, right, the lowest part, and the grades didn't matter. But I was a reader. I was an avid reader, and then when I started college, I only applied to University of Toledo. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and I got in. And later realized they let everybody in. Sure. And after 2.5 years, I was still a freshman. I finally one day just decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to be a student for the first time. So I was playing music. I was a rock and roller, and I stopped working. And I decided to be a serious student. I want to be well, I had a lot of catching up to do, right? So I was 20 years old. So now, mind you, the difference between a verb and a noun, I don't know, you know what I mean? So,
não gosto muito deste veículo.
But I worked at it. I really, really worked, and I loved learning. And so, I was starting fresh. Well, fast forward 4 years, I'm sitting on a panel with none other than a young Cornel West, right? Now, mind you, so we're on this panel together, and I'm thinking, hey, I'm going into this conference as this 24-year-old thinking I'm big stuff, right? It wasn't a big conference, but still. And then, luckily, Cornell spoke before me, and I went, oh, okay, oh, whoa. And this guy, he never even looked at his notes. I mean, he was just going, and he was, he was probably early 30s at that point, right? Like, oh man, it was just such a humbling moment for me, and it was the first of many.
Esta view é bem melhor.
But luckily, it happened right there. So then, from then on, as a graduate student, all through the rest of my career, I always knew that I was really a nobody, and I was never going to reach where he is, and it was very helpful.
Gotcha.
You ever listen to him talk? You ever listen to really take him when he's just going in 1,000 directions? Yeah, well, you listen to people.
A bit. He was actually at the event that I was just at a while ago in New York City. It was funny because he was backstage and he was very friendly to everybody that came off the stage. Like, you did a good job, really good job. He was shaking everybody's hand backstage. I remember that. I only remember because of his crazy hair, but yeah. But he seemed like a friendly guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's good for us.
Yeah. Good representation or good for?
Well, no. It's good to have folks who really are just. You have to be humble enough to know what your limitations are.
Yeah, right? I agree. Yeah.
You are. I really like. I've listened to you more. I mean,
Jeff
Hamill is the person who introduced me to you, and he's the one who took my live stream, as you know, and just took it out into the world, and now we're at over 70 million views.
Ok, posso acabar o sonar.
But you know, he just said like, "Hey, you gotta listen to this guy," right? So I started listening to you, and you're very, you just have a nice way of just coming at things and approaching stuff. I think it's really important. You know.
Yeah, I try my best most of the time. So one of the, obviously this is like I don't know how, actually, have you ever done like shows like this where you go on and you chat about, I guess like college
sunken
stuff,
buildings,
or like to random internet celeb kind of people, or is it pretty?
What do I even
like
want to?
Stuff generally, or what?
No, I'm pretty much all over the place. I mean, we've been.
What do I want to do?
I do a lot of work internationally, so
gotcha.
Lots and lots of different things. I mean, I'm all over, right? I work with the police, I work with the military, I work here, I work there. I'm kind of like, do a little bit of everything.
Well, I guess then, so you've probably talked about this before, but it's kind of come up a lot on my stream. It's always hard to get a feel on what is actually happening in schools, because like obviously what I'd like is like, show me a study that controls for a bunch of things and then compares this to that, and then we can see everything. But that's obviously really hard to do when it comes to like feelings of political expression on campus, or how students feel about things, how professors feel about things. I guess like one of the big concerns I've had, and I see a lot of people having these concerns, but again, it's hard to quantify it, and then I want your opinion on it. So it kind of feels like when I was going to school way back in 2008, so long ago, not that long ago, but when I was going to school, at least even at that point, it kind of felt like, or the idea that I was sold, even at that time, was that college was the last place that you were supposed to go to be challenged. Like, this is going to be the place where you go, you're going to hear new ideas, some of them might make you uncomfortable, but that's part of the college experience. And this is really the last place you're going to ever have to explore those kinds of ideas, because once you get in the world, it's not the job of like your workplace to challenge you ideologically, or you don't want people on the street, confronting you over things you believe. This is like your last ditch effort for sanitization against crazy ideas or exposure to ideas.
Or unless you get Jehovah's Witnesses knocking at your door, then you have an opportunity.
Sure.
Yo, I'm not sacar as
break out your edgy high school atheism internet debate times. Yeah, that would be the time to do it. But it feels like today the approach to schooling has kind of become markedly different, where you have a lot of these concepts from sociology that in and of themselves aren't bad. And in and of themselves, I think I would agree with most of them. We can get into specifics if you want. Things like the paradox of intolerance or safe spaces or whatever. Like, I don't think any of these ideas are bad on their own, but it feels like these have all kind of like come together in a way to create these like radically intolerant environments where there is kind of like a certain, I sound like a crazy conservative when I say this, but like there's this type of like progressive orthodoxy that is like rigidly enforced from top to bottom, and it's very good at excising anything that doesn't seem to toe the line. Do you feel like that? Do you feel like that's like an accurate feeling that schools are kind of shifting in that direction, or do you think that's kind of an illusion created by just a few cherry-picked examples? Or I guess, what is your feeling on that?
Yeah, the answer is yes and no. Okay. So to give folks a sense of, let me say a little bit more about who I am, so people have this sense, right? So
who are you?
I teach this class, 800 students from all over the world. It's about generally speaking, it's about 45% are white people. But all backgrounds, class backgrounds, religious backgrounds, etc. Right?
I think I can make a solar mirror.
I'm in the middle of the heat, right? I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. I mean, there's nobody who's more in the center. It's a big state university, Penn State University, and I'm willing to push the boundaries of things. We had a television show we worked on. The title was "You Can't Say That."
But you're one guy.
Right? That won an Emmy Award, actually, the first episode, and so David Horowitz labeled me one of the 101 most dangerous professors in America some 15 years ago. Okay. And Fox News takes me on, and Black Lives Matter at Penn State tries to cancel me. I mean, from all over the place.
Que eu faço este upgrade.
Somehow. So I'm willing to really kind of push
build a high power sonar.
everything, right? My job is to challenge everybody. You walk in my class, my job is to change your mind. Whatever you're thinking, I just want to change it somehow. You can decide how that is, but I want to shake you up, okay? I'm a registered libertarian, right? So, I mean, I studied Marxist sociology, but I stay a registered libertarian. I read libertarian stuff because sociology itself
já tenho uma drone
is inclined to lean toward the left, because what we do is we try to understand all the invisible strings and factors and forces that shape our behavior.
Yeah.
And what we want to improve society. We want to make it better. And so therefore, when we identify what all those things are, then we say as sociologists, well, you got to change this, you got to change this, you got to change this. And then all these outcomes will happen, right? Well, when you change those things, that means you're going to impose some outside will on, which is going to come from the state or the government. You're going to impose that on populations of people, right? So that's like this sort of socialist bent to it. Well, this is what we do as sociologists, right? Like we have an obesity problem. Like, so, well, one way to do it is stop allowing businesses to sell 64-ounce sodas, man. No one needs a 64-ounce soda. Sure. And so, like, we study this and we see if we did that, we did lower the incidence of obesity. And so we said, okay, do that. Well, then we get the critique of being on the left and socialists and all this kind of stuff. We're imposing our will on everybody. Well, I'm trained to do that. And so what I do is say, man, I'm going to be neck deep in the libertarian literature to make sure that I balance myself out. You know, I want to be right here. I want to be in the center. I want to challenge myself constantly, right? Okay, so that's the background for me.
Quanto tempo é que eu demoro se for por debaixo da água? 6 minutos são mesmo.
People are sleeping through school, right? Sure. School is really not very interesting. And most classes, what do? We have trained legions of students for years and years and years, and it's getting probably more problematic, actually, to memorize facts and spit them back on exams and get grades and then be done and say that we're educated. And then we, wipe the slate clean, we wipe our brains clean, and we go to the next exam, the next class, whatever it is, right? Well, increasingly, we've just organized schooling around that. It makes sense. It's rational, makes sense. Not everybody can have the high-paying job. Not everybody can have this and have whatever it is people want. We just need to have markers to know that who are we gonna let through the doorway. So it's a very rational way to do it, and that's how we run schooling. That's not true of all schooling, but across the board, I will say probably most classes at Penn State, when I ask students, and not just at Penn State anymore.
Hey, I found the thing.
Hey, how are your classes?
Hello.
Oh, really? Well, what's going on? The teacher just lectures at us, writes on the board. We take notes down, and then what do you do? Well, I study.
Vou ter que ir às compras outra vez.
This kind of thing. I'm like, okay, where's the critical thinking happening? Well, I sit around with my friends. It's not true in every single class, but it's true in far, far too many, and it's true across the board at university, except a few select universities, right? Well, if that's the case, then what's it matter that we have free speech zones, or we have safe zones, or we have, nobody pays attention. Like, if I say, like, hey, at Penn State, like, here, there's certain safe zones on campus, right? Like, 99.9% of the students at a place like Penn State have no idea what I'm talking about, where it is, what that means. They don't care.
Mas espera, eu acho que ele está a falar de coisas diferentes.
And it doesn't mean that because they're mean-spirited or therefore they're going to go out and start saying all these racist, sexist, homophobic things or whatever the case is, or they don't care about those issues. It just means that it doesn't matter what the institution does. For most people, they're just living their lives and moving on. It's not really impacting them. And when we read that even some professor like me, I say something really radical in my class, and then it's picked up by Fox News, and Fox News is saying, oh, this professor trying to brainwash his students. Listen, man, 4 of the 800 students in my class even really heard me say it and understood the implications of that.
Is this guy Shaggy?
The vast majority of students, they heard me say it, and they're like,
is this guy old Shaggy?
Okay, all right. Yeah, all right. And they move
Zoinks!
on. So there is a move to
shape.
There's a move to kind of adopt certain agendas, and I'm not sure it's the liberal agenda, but for the day-to-day experience of the average student, it doesn't impress them in any way whatsoever. Doesn't impress them either, but it doesn't impress them.
Okay, yeah. So it kind of sounds like it sounds like when I was in school, like most people are there to just kind of show up and hopefully pass the test, get the degree, and then get out, basically, yeah.
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 And then hopefully and then if they're lucky, they're doing something like you're doing, right? They're actually, then they leave school and they start thinking.
If you're really
but,
lucky. It's kind of funny.
That's my take on it.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I was gonna say it's kind of funny because like I see like now that I'm out of college, I had to quit because I was doing I was working too much. But like after getting out of college and then spending time in the real world, I guess there's always that saying that youth is wasted on the young because you don't realize like all the opportunities, everything available to you when you're young. Yeah. Now I see that like it feels like in colleges or in university in general, there's a lot of stuff to do and opportunities, and like going to class and just passing the test. That's like one of like maybe even the least important things that you can be doing on campus. There are like so many opportunities. There's frats, there's events, there's massive amounts of resources. You have libraries.
Eu não fiz caralho na faculdade.
Everything, but it seems like for people that are like in school, you don't really think about any of that. You're just like, I need to go to school, pass the test, and then get out. And then looking back at it retrospectively, like, man, what a waste of time. Fuck, there's so much cool stuff you can do in college. Like, why would you just worry about this? Yeah. But I mean, I understand it, of course, for the people there and everything. But yeah.
Yeah, sure. Imagine what you would do if right now someone said, hey, listen, you can't do anything for the next 4 years. You can't do any of your work for the next 4 years. All you can do is you got to hang out at this college campus where you have a massive library of all these resources, and you got to be there for 4 years. Imagine how exciting that would be. You know what I mean? To not be interrupted by all
and then to be able to just like explore other things on campus, talk to other students. Like there's if you could go back. I don't know if I read a short story once where it was just an extended joke. But the idea of like aging in reverse would be so much fun because you'd be so much more equipped with the wisdom to take advantage of like all the opportunities on campus rather than like the really stupid way. And again, no offense to college, I was stupid, and I wouldn't expect anything different because you don't know the value of like what you could get out of college if you've never worked before. But it sucks because it's always like I think I find pretty ubiquitously throughout everybody I talk to that's aged 25 or 30 and over, like what's the one piece of advice you try harder in high school, try harder in college, like make sure that you're doing more than just like going to, like make sure you're not skipping class. Like it's always like I've never found somebody who's like, you know what, I wish I would have studied a little bit less, or I wish I would have done a little bit less in college, I wish I would have just partied more. Like I'm sure those people are out there, but generally the overwhelming amount is like take advantage of like what you have as a kid, even through 18, 24, because you have no idea when you have to wake up and work every single day, how much life changes,
Yeah, well, and the problem is when that message is coming from parents, there's also a subtext to it, which is that, but make sure you get a job so I don't have to take care of you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Whereas me, I don't have kids. I just have my students and the sort of and folks, and my take is,
dude, that's sad. You don't have any kids? What the fuck? Are you some kind of loser?
Gap year, do whatever it takes, whatever you can do. Oh my gosh, but. Yeah, it's we live in a college town here. I mean, it's a big college town, but we have a lot of retirement communities. Man, what an awesome thing that is. Hey, by the way, George Carlin has a really funny shtick where he like says, "Wouldn't it be interesting if life actually happened backwards?" And he walks us through.
I'm almost positive that's what I was thinking of when I was referring to that.
Por que todos os sociólogos gostam do George Carlin? Menos a Maria, claro.
But by the way, I don't mean to say that. I mean, there is a sense in which universities have sort of organized ideologically around kind of a social justice kind of paradigm.
Acho que arranjaste tudo, I'm gonna be honest.
Which I think, it makes sense, right? I mean, I see that. What's the alternative, right? I mean, but the problem is, when social justice only starts to get defined in one particular way, and it means one particular thing, as opposed to, lots of other things. So like, one thing I do in my class is, I really push the envelope on this kind of thing, right? Like I bring, last semester I brought 3 students who identified with, one was African, one was Afro-Caribbean, one was African-American, to the front of the class, and we just talked about their experience and what oppression means, and what this means, and that means, and power, and privilege, and supremacy, and all that kind of stuff. Well, but so then we started talking about Haiti and what it means to have an American passport or to be able to travel here to the U.S., to live here in the U.S., and cell phones, right? And all the slavery that exists in cell phones. I'm asking, hey, give me your cell phone. And I said, do you know how much slave labor is in this cell phone? And he's like, no, I don't. I'm like, well, why not? Like, how do you not know that? How do you have a cell phone? What would, and this was the African American student, like, what would your ancestors say? That all you got to do is plug in slavery in iPhone, and you'll have 10 videos will pop up about all the slavery that's right in this phone, and you don't even take the time to do that. Like, come on, man. Like, what is that?
That's crazy.
And so, what we don't have is enough challenges to everybody on those kinds of terms, because there are very few people like myself. I can do that, and I can do it, with 5 cameras in the room and streaming on YouTube all over the world, right? But most people would be very reticent to do that because we've created a kind of culture that makes it difficult for people to challenge the people who have been identified as being
Starship launch fuel?
Certain groups of people, let's
Sure.
say.
We can. Woke is kind of feels very conservative to use the term, but yeah, it definitely feels like there's a there's like a certain way of viewing the world and all of our problems, and the challenge of that is very. It seems like it's getting harder and harder to bring up on college campuses. Do you ever feel like or go ahead, yeah.
No, it is, but only for people who themselves aren't schooled in things, right? Like, there's nothing I can't talk about because, like, I can do that. I mean, here I am. I've got 3 black students in the front of my class, and I'm saying, look, man, what the hell? What are you doing? Like, what would you say to your great-great-great-grandfather about the fact that you own a product made by slaves that has slave labor in it, and you don't care even to look into that, and you don't even want to know, because the one student was saying, well, I kind of heard about that. I'm like, you heard about that?
Yeah.
Like, and you didn't investigate it, and you still own your phone? Like, this is come on. And so I'm pushing, because that's my job, is to push. And my job is to make every single student in that class at some point uncomfortable with whatever position they hold, and to push them out of that. And you know what? And what we don't get, and this is what we don't get on the right, people like who are on the right and conservatives, the Tuckers of the world and so on, they feel like these students don't want to be challenged. And they do, man. Those 3 students were like, oh my God, that was amazing. I feel smarter as a result of you pushing me in the way that you just did.
Leaving Pearl.
But, a lot of people just are uncomfortable.
Do you feel like so I'm curious, because the story has been told time and time and time again. It seems like the number of professors are mounting where they try to do something similar to what you're bringing up, and they end up getting pushback that's so severe that they end up, if not like completely ousted from their position, they're either forced to resign or basically like shunned into. Do you why do you think in your particular like department or your university, why don't you ever worry about this, or do you worry about this? Do you think it's coming for you eventually, or what are your feelings on that?
No, it's not coming. There's a few, we had this move after. I've had times when folks on the right or on the left or whatever tried to so-called just called me out on social media on certain things, but mostly people don't, because most people who do have never been in my class. If you're in my class, you see what's going on, and you trust me, right? Because I get what's happening. I've dedicated my life to this, 40 years of studying these kinds of issues, right? I've lived around the world, and I've been, I had the experience. I know how to talk about things, right? And it's like deep in me. Like, I know how to talk about just like hair, for example.
Sorry,
we have a couple classes on up on YouTube just all about hair. Well, I know how to talk about hair. I know a lot about hair. I'm like you, right? I'm going to learn about hair. I'm going to go out on my own. You went out and learned about Ukraine. You didn't study that your whole life. It's a new war. You said, like, I mean, you've been studying geopolitical issues, because the way I've listened to you talk about things, I'm like, okay, this guy's been thinking about this for a long time. but there are specifics about things that you got to go out and you got to learn a little bit. Well, that's what I do. And so like, I can talk about this stuff and I know how to talk about it. I'm not going to put my foot in my mouth.
Gotcha.
Because I'm good at it. And a lot of people aren't. They're just like, it's like nails on a chalkboard. It's like, oh God, when you say that, like, you're just a white man, or you're just whatever. It's like, oh.
Have you
No, go ahead. Yeah, so go ahead.
No, go ahead. Because I was going to ask kind of something related to the last thing that you just said.
Well, like for example, most recently with trans issues and non-binary issues, right? Like, so for me, for 30 years I've been talking about binaries, and like, what is this? Most of us are bi. I mean, like, it's hard to be 100% straight or 100% queer, or not queer, that's the word, 100% homosexual or heterosexual, right?
Yeah, you've got like the McKinsey scale, and people say that we all come.
Yeah, but like, come on, man! All you got to be is in the right moment or meet the right person, and you can be like, oh, okay, hang on, I can feel something in here, right? So so we're in there. So I've been like in the non-binary for years, right, and loving it. Well, for me, it's like about time people start using they and them. This is good, right? I've been thinking this for years and saying this for years. But yet, when I have a student who,
it's just launch
in front of class, let's say, who wants to be referred to as they or them, and in my class, I just keep tripping over it, right? Because I've been speaking the English language for 61 years. Sure. It's like, there I did it again. Like, and like I tell, a couple of students come up and I say, listen, I'm going to trip over this because you present as he or you present as she, and I'm going to trip over it. You know that. And then I trip over it, and I'm like, see, there. I turn my mic off. I'm like, hey, there. I just did it. Okay, whatever. But then I say it to the class, and the class has a trust in me that, like, okay, no, this guy really is, because I got stories. I can tell you, 31 years ago, 32 years ago, when I counseled my very first student who was transitioning from he to she, from M to F, right? And I'm like, don't think you're calling me out, right? I've been in this a long time, right? And so I've been cool with this for a long, long, long time. But yet I'm tripping over it. And yet I look at some other person and like, they're not tripping over it. I'm like, God, okay. But there has to be a trust. Like, yeah, this Sam knucklehead, like, yeah, but we trust him, like, because got it. And I think a lot of people don't really have that because they just don't have the experience.
Yeah, so it's always hard to figure out sometimes because, like, somebody will make a claim about how, like, a professor or a certain person, they did something racist. And I'm like, okay, well, what did they do? And then you go and you'll read, like, the particular story, and if there are no quotes, you have to start making a lot of assumptions. Like, well, it seems like what they did wasn't necessarily that bad, but, like, I could conceive of a world where the professor is, like, really compassionate and just said something, like, maybe a little bit too challenging for the students and it was taken the wrong way, or another world where the professor is actually kind of a dick and it seems like he doesn't care about or have compassion for these issues, and then he brought up a challenging statement, and so understandably people have that type of reaction,
Yes.
Yeah.
Or they tried to make a joke and it fell flat.
Maybe, yeah. It's really hard to tell. It's hard to tell sometimes because I get worried that more and more things are shifting into this direction to where originally I might read something, where, a professor does something that's racist, transphobic, or whatever, and it's like, okay, well, were they an asshole about it? Like, was it really that, or was it that they were a jerk? But then I'm seeing more stories where it's like, this is getting harder to defend. There was a New York Times story about, do you know anything about Donald McNeil?
Yeah, I do, and I don't know the exact story, but I know.
Okay, he did a trip to Peru that he'd done a few times with some college kids, and I guess he was in the habit of having, like, challenging conversations with the kids, and a couple topics came up for that, and I think he eventually, like, got fired from the New York Times and everything. And when I read through that story, where there's a lot of information given, and I feel like I'm getting a decent perspective on it, I see stuff like that, I'm like, this seems kind of shitty. I don't think this guy should have been fired for that, or it's a little worrying that, like, the entire institution turned against him for that. Yeah, and I feel like some more of those seem to be popping up, and then I get a little bit worried because outside of so that's in the academic world, that's a problem. Outside the academic world, or go ahead, yeah.
No, it's no wonder that people are afraid to touch these issues, right? I mean, you know, look, for me, last summer when Fox News, Tucker...
Ai, vou ter que ir buscar comida para o cão.
And then just the whole right wing, I mean, they just picked up. They were looking for the poster child for critical race theory.
Okay.
And they picked this clip out on me that was just like very nothing. I mean, first off, they picked 2 clips out. Well, one was Andrew Sullivan. It was Distort Denusa, Dinesh D'Souza, right? When he was at Dartmouth, his nickname was Distort Denusa.
Yeah.
So he picked the first one up. I was critiquing this Coca-Cola. This is you know, I mean, maybe you did this, right? But it was a kind of training that was happening at Coca-Cola, and somebody had put up kind of on a slide, you know, white people need to be less oppressive and less ignorant and less stupid and less this and less that, right? And I was just like, oh my God, that's terrible, right? So I took those words and I put them on a slide, and I asked some white people just about it, you know, like, hey, so this is from training that happened at Coca-Cola, and you know, white people need to be less oppressive, less ignorant, less stupid, less this, less that, right?
Oh, I think I actually remember. I think I might have covered this on my stream, right? And they presented it as though you were telling your classroom this instead of. I think I'm almost positive we went over this story. I didn't know that was you. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so you know, I mean, just like that kind of thing. Like, oh my God, like, and you know, this kind. But if they would have taken, and see, the left does this too, right? The left does it, the right does it. If they would have taken this segment and showed the entire segment on Fox News or whatever conservative site it was, they'd have been able to say, whoa, this sociologist is making a really good point about the absurdity of some of this, like, social justice, whatever, right? Like, it would have been a perfect opinion piece for Fox News, right? Yeah. Well, so would my other piece have been, actually, if they would have taken the entire clip, right? But they didn't do that. And so I can understand why people would start to get, you know, very antsy talking about this. But what I've decided to do is put, and this is Jeff and I, but, you know, this was kind of when he came along, said, we're going to put everything I ever do that we ever do in that room. We're going to put it out onto YouTube.
Trace the survivors
so that
across
nobody
the
can
ocean.
ever say, like, if you can always go back to see the original.
Search for the crew.
Yeah.
And so that's.
I gotta look for
really
people now.
I mean, that's the only way around it.
Yeah, I'd say even at that sense, it doesn't always work. But that's something that I figured out recently. I've gone full on to say that, like, I'm not going to defend 15-second clips of me because I don't make 15-second videos. So whatever you're seeing, that's a 15-second video. That's not. I don't endorse that message. You know, like, you might see something that seems like highly irresponsible. It probably is, but it would be if I released it as a 30-second video. But that's not what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so you just have to ignore it, and that's what I do. I ignore it. But here's the thing, right? So Penn State, they got hammered. Look, I was getting a hate email every 5 minutes. I mean, I had hundreds and hundreds. I had to stop checking my mail and answering my phone for about 3 weeks, right? But to his credit, my university, they watched the whole thing. They saw the clips. People, you know, they get complaints all the time, and my bosses watch my whole class, and they say, "Oh, that was actually pretty cool. That was great." But somebody's going to complain about something, you know, eventually. But to their credit, from the president on down, I've been here a long time. I'm not outlandish. I'm very thoughtful. I'm very careful in the kinds of things that I say, and they know that I challenge people, and they really have my back. And they just said, no, not at all. We're not. No. And people were demanding that I get fired, and it wasn't even remotely on the table, because there's a trust. And so what happens with a lot of people who haven't built up that trust, that, you know, they don't get the backing of their institution or their company or whatever it is. But when you're somebody like me who's got 30 years of building up the trust, it's like, okay, you know, and I think that matters. You know?
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with you. I was invited to there's a university in California called Pepperdine to talk to a bunch of high school students. It was like a youth seminar thing or whatever. And this audience it must have been like, I want to say like, fuck, I don't remember 100%, but I want to say like 20 or 30% white. So very colorful audience, very different ethnic backgrounds, very strong social justice opinions. They were a highly active political group of young people in California. And and I was kind of worried because it's like if I'm invited to give speeches and things, like I want to challenge people. It's what I do on stream or whatever. And I was like very challenging of a lot of like I think there were certain BLM narratives or trans narratives that I was like putting forth challenges to. But I think if you listen to me speak, like it's pretty obvious that I'm always coming from a place of compassion for these people and like bettering society. Yeah. And I was expecting to get a lot more of like the militant pushback, but I didn't. All the kids there were super excited to talk to me. It was a super positive experience for me. I loved it. It was really fun. And I, people like write letters afterwards and they thank me for coming. I thought it was like really cute. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And it's really hard sometimes to figure out, you just circling back on everything we've said, it's like, I wish I could see some of the confrontations that happen in class and then get the further background on it, because it's so hard to tell if like the students are becoming activists and crazy, which to some extent I'm sure they are, or if like the professors are just huge fucking dicks, and like of course the students are always gonna have that type of interaction. I was lucky enough that for the kids that I was talking to, the person that went after me was Dennis Prager, who I'm sure you've heard of. And he kind of, in a way, went over similar topics, but I could see their response to him, but he was so much more aggressive in his rhetoric about it. Like, bringing up the idea that, like, there is no such thing as systemic racism. And a kid goes, well, why do you think, what about systemic injustice, like in the criminal justice system? Yeah. And he's like, black people are in jail more than white people because minorities commit more crime. Yeah. And it's like, that is true, but I feel like I could say the same thing without like the kids going crazy over it, because he's saying it in the most like provocative way possible. It's like, geez.
Well, the thing is, if you're gonna make that, he's gonna make an argument like that, and I'm like, hey, dude, that's actually not a very thoughtful argument. Yeah. Right.
And it's boring because it's not even like people committing crime isn't even the interesting question. The interesting question is why do they commit more crime? That's where you're actually getting into the thoughtful discussion, right?
Yeah, or it's. Yeah, it's just. Do we want to get somewhere, or do we want to just
provoke people?
Just beat people up, provoke people. Yeah. And it's like, and he's now come in that world, like as a lot of these people have done. Like, so let's say somebody like me, I get canceled out, I lose my job, and then I become this darling of the right wing, and I just start attacking everything that is social justice or cancel culture or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. And like, there's a lot of money to be made. I mean, I could triple, quadruple my income easily.
Why I left
if I just got myself fired and then you started going out on speaking tours. But like, it's just not very smart. It's not very thoughtful, and I don't want that. And besides, like, for me, I need to help the people who take a more of a social justice approach. I need to help them really firm up and sharpen their argument. And then the people on the right who are critiquing that, my job is to help them make better critiques of that. Like, be really better at the way you come at it. And so I have to be able to make both arguments or all the arguments in between. And my job is just to help people. If you're going to hold that position, then here, let me help you hold the position, right? If you want to make the argument that we need to close down the borders in the in the South with Mexico, it's like, okay, you can make that argument. I wouldn't make that argument. Well, I might, but if you want to make it, here's the dumb way to make it, what I think, and here's a kind of a smart way to make it. So let me help you sharpen that up.
And that's always been.
Folks...
Oh yeah, go ahead. Or I was gonna say that's on that. Like, that's always been kind of like my thing, is that I've gotten frustrated that progressives are like dog shit at arguing for things these days. God. It feels like the reason why I got popular on the internet is because I kind of have like an internet bully background. So I can do the bravado and scream at people and shout at people, and I'm a very like, I'm very like number and data driven. Like, all of my arguments, like, I'm never gonna sit here and try to convince you that like we should let immigrants into the country because it's the right thing to do. That's never the argument I'm gonna make. It's gonna be reasons of economy. It's gonna be reasons of like foreign politics. It's always gonna be from those grounds. And it was always shocking to me because early in my internet career, for debating, for like politics stuff, I'm like, I don't know why liberals run from like these like fact-based arguments, because like when we're arguing about like climate change, when we're arguing about like monetary policy, like we're arguing these things, like the conservatives don't have the data on any of these answers. The conservatives don't have the facts, but somehow the conservatives became the party of like, like your feelings don't care about my facts, or facts don't care about feelings. Like, what, dude, all of your arguments are either like theologically based or just based on like, this is what my small conservative community feels. How do we lose that? And so I fought like that early on, but then I feel like it's kind of gone back to that way where progressives are very scared to deal with any data-driven answers whatsoever. All of the arguments become like this type of like ethical orthodoxy, like progressive beliefs, and if you question any of them in any way, section reform, you're doomed. And then the issue you run into is, as you said, you don't have that like inoculation effect. Like what happens when you step into the real world and somebody actually gives you a good argument for why, like, should we give unlimited gender-affirming care to trans people? What about when they detransition? Oh shit, the only time I've ever heard detransitioning brought up is when people said that's a transphobic thing. And I've never even talked to a person like that in real life. It's like, well, now you're not equipped to actually answer these questions in real life. And what's worse, anybody that's standing by on the sidelines watching these arguments happens sees a conservative that's really eager to dive into studies and data and fact, and progressives that are just saying, if you don't believe me, you're evil. And it's like, well, fuck, now you've lost. You've lost the arguments.
Yeah. Well, and so what I often see, or what I sometimes see, maybe often, is the liberals who they don't have the data, and then they stay in this kind of moralistic place, and because it's just easier, because they can't make the argument. And the most fascinating thing that happens is when a liberal who's sort of rooted in the moralistic and argumentation encounters someone who's conservative with really thoughtful, sharp, and smart perspectives that are driven by facts and ideas, right?
Yeah.
And like the person has nothing to say, and the opposite happens. The conservative that's just like basing on who knows their vision of God or vision of something. I have no idea. Who encounters someone who's really sharp and very thoughtful, and they have nowhere to go. And so, I mean, maybe that's just kind of where we're doomed to have those kinds of experiences. It's
Yeah, we could be, but I feel like there needs to be more like I think if you see it, if you see the challenge and then you understand how to address the challenge, you're better equipped for it in the future. This is why like people get mad at me, but like I think that the worst types of people, I say worst from my perspective, should be allowed to like give speeches on college campuses. Like if you think that Nazis talking on a college campus is scary, you should wait until they're on 4chan or on Twitter, and now you don't have a professor to talk about the conversation afterwards. Now you don't have fellow people to reflect on anything they're saying. And it's so incredibly frustrating. Are you familiar with Matt Walsh and his recent documentary of like how to be a woman, or like what is a woman or whatever? It's basically it's a big his anti-trans documentary essentially. But it's so frustrating to see even academics sometimes that he'll interview that are unwilling to critically engage with his question. And like you should be able to.
Because even if I engage with the question and somebody sees that, I might be seen as supporting that, and then I might be called out as being homophobic or sexist or racist or something.
How do I use this?
It's better if I don't even talk about it. I mean, look, I can't get in trouble if I say nothing.
Exactly, and that's the issue, right? Nothing ventured, nothing gained, I think, right? If you've got a whole academic institution that's too scared to even, like, again, toss their hat in the ring, the thing that progressives never seem to understand is if you're not willing to engage with that idea, they will. It's kind of like the common talking point on the left is like, it's not my job to educate you. Okay, that's great that you feel that way, but Jordan Peterson loves educating people. Ben Shapiro loves educating people. So if it's not your job to educate, there's going to be somebody in the right to step up and do it. So when you abdicate that position, you've essentially ceded all of that ground to your ideological adversaries. Why would you ever do that? It just seems so insane,
Yeah. I guess one of the things that I'm particularly careful about, and one of the things that kind of
allows the user to summon
in the classroom, because it really does keep you, even though I do lots and lots of things outside the classroom. But I watch that eventually people just start to go too far, right? I've been kind of watching Peterson this past year or so. Like you get too, it's almost like you get too popular and you start thinking that you're bigger, or somehow you can get away with saying things. And his just this take on the swimsuit model thing or whatever. It's like,
the Elliot Page stuff.
You don't have to, just don't comment on that. Really, it doesn't matter. Like, what do you? It's just so.
What are you doing, man?
Forget about Shapiro, right? It's just their job. They make money off of being provocative, and like, I'm just like, there's no need for that. It's not going to get us anywhere. Now, mind you, I'm a
Acho que fiquei
professor,
encalhado.
so like my job is to work with people to mold minds and or help people mold their own minds, right? I mean, that's what I do. But my job is to confuse people. So, which is what I say all the time. I want, every time you leave my classroom, I want you to be confused. Or any talk that I give, I want you to be confused. Because that way you're going to have to go out and try to figure it out for yourself, right? But like, oh gosh, you know, these people that they make money off of this is like, it's a little bit troubling.
Yeah,
Wait,
you end
hold
up
on.
with like I mentioned this before. You kind of talked about this in the beginning, but for some reason I always mention there's two types of people that get really good at something. The first type of person gets really good at a particular thing, and then they look around and they say, "Wow, I know so much about this thing. I bet every other topic could be equally as complicated." And then you've got the other type of person who gets really good at something. They're like, if I got really good at this one thing, I bet I know everything about everything. And I'm just going to go tell people, And that latter category is where I put, not trying to provoke you, I don't know who you feel about, but I feel that way about like some people like Jordan Peterson, who I would say that like when he's talking about psychology, at least in the past, everything he's saying is like not even good, but even insightful sometimes. Like I think he had a lot of positive and valuable insight into psychology. I thought he was really good at getting those points across. Elon Musk has interesting things to say about stuff like limited to the realm that he's talking about, but that's another guy who gets like pretty good at like business related stuff, and all of a sudden he's like giving speeches on like general AI and everything. It's like, I don't know if you know anything about this. Like, why do I care about Elon Musk's opinion about cryptocurrency? I don't think I do. But yeah, some of these people start to step into every realm, and suddenly they become these
Tem que buscar mais Coca-Cola
for somebody
e
that is
comida
like
do cão.
not mathematics. There's a word for somebody that knows like every single topic or whatever. They yeah, they seem to become these types of people, but they don't know everything about every topic.
Andar
And
de
people seem to
submarino.
worship
Eu acho que
everything
sim.
they say. Oh, a polymath.
Isto é craft.
Polymath. Well, this is if for me. The other side is, I always know, you know, when I'm doing my thing.
Mas a cena é que aqui não estão 37 graus, não é? No videojogo.
I know
Na
there's
vida real,
somebody
sim.
watching, or eventually is going to be watching, who is an expert on whatever it is I'm talking about. And
Yeah,
it keeps
always.
me very careful. Like, keeps me humble.
Is
keeps
it me?
Careful.
Or I'm
It's like,
completely
damn, like,
fucked?
you
Oh no,
need
I'm
it
not.
here. But
Because
it
of
also
Simon.
makes me a lot smarter, because then I know the places where I need to ask a question as opposed to giving an answer. And my most common answer to any question is like, well, I'm not really sure, but I kind of have thought about that. But you know, maybe it's also, if someone was paying me as much money as people are paying these guys, maybe I would just come up with answers and be like, oh yeah, okay, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, that's
But
another issue too, and I notice this because in my world I have to be a bit more combative, right? Because I'm trying to win an opinion over, and you're not paying to take a class from me. You're like looking at me as a competitor to the other people in the world that I inhabit. So there's this interesting middle ground I have to inhabit where I'm usually willing to concede, like, I don't know about this particular thing. I don't have the background for it. But it's an interesting dynamic when I go to argue with somebody and they'll never make that concession. I think by me taking the more intellectually honest position, I can have the appearance of being weaker sometimes. There are times where, and I employed this strategy for a little bit, but then I stopped because I don't want to get caught doing this because it hurts my credibility. But like, I noticed that like if I prepare really well for a debate, a lot of people don't know this, but there aren't like millions of high quality studies out there. If you're debating almost any topic, there's going to be like a few pieces of key literature that people are talking about for almost any big topic. There's going to be like 2 or 3 studies you really need to know. So if I'm like really well versed on a particular topic, I'll know what the big studies are and I'll be able to talk about that. And it is crazy to me how many people will just cite a study to me in a debate and have the total opposite conclusion. And as soon as I push them on it, I'll be like, I don't think that that's right. They'll be like, oh, okay. And then they'll just move on. And it's like, wait, you don't even know what you're talking about. Yeah, but I have to be careful because if somebody brings something up where they're like, well, actually, you know, it's actually been demonstrated through like a macroecon thing that, you know, when you do this with rent control, this happens. And I'm like, oh shoot, if I take the cautious position and go, I don't actually know if that's true or not, I look weak because the other person is willing to assert that they know even if they don't. And that's a really weird dynamic to have play out in conversations, you know?
I experienced that in the opposite way, although I never really ask people, but I always, when I concede or I say, you know, I haven't really thought about that.
Is that a copper,
I think what
whatever?
you're saying is actually not true. I don't know why that is. I have to go study it, but my gut tells me that that's actually not the place. I actually feel like it puts me in a better footing because I'm willing to say, all right, I don't really know. I'm willing to change my mind or think about it more deeply, but I certainly understand that this stuff is very complicated. And there's nothing more complicated, by the way, than the kinds of things that I talk about every day. It's like human beings. I mean, oh my God, it's so. But you know, the other side that I get is I do a lot of things that, because we have these videos, I do a lot of things that that you can't see everything that's behind it. So you don't really know what's going on and what's happening. You know, so for example, a number of years ago, there was I had a student in class who stuttered, and it was really serious stuttering. And by the way, right now, there's probably some way. A stutter is what it was called when I was as far back as I can remember. But now I haven't learned what would be the more appropriate. A speech impediment is fine, but what's the speech impediment is actually a stutter. There's probably a word for it.
A better word.
That usually I would learn. Sure. Yeah, I would learn that, but I haven't learned it, and so someone would call me out. It's like, you know, that's not cool. You should say this. I'm like, okay. Sure. But in any case, and so he started talking, and I gave him the microphone in the room, right? So it was a big, huge room. There's 800 people in it, and I say like, oh, okay, hang on a second. And he couldn't get the words out, and I turned my mic off, and I said, hey, but he raised his hand to answer the question. So first off, I'm like, he's raising his hand. He knows he's going to have a hard time getting his comment out. The rest I used to be the faculty advisor for the Disabled Student Association at Rutgers University, so I'm really comfortable in this whole world of whatever disabilities are. So I'm just, so the first thing was I just sat and waited for him to get it out. Meanwhile, I know the whole class is just getting really nervous because they're nervous for him. I'm like, of course, why are you nervous for him? He's not nervous. Like, he took the microphone and he's asking the question, right? It took him about a minute. When he got done, I turned my mic off and I said, hey, you want to come down front? Would it be easier for you to just come down and sit on the table in front? He's like, yeah, okay. So I said, hey, come on. So we went down front, right? Now, mind you, no one knows that I asked him to come down, if he wanted to come down front. People had the idea that I told him to come down front. Now he's front and center on the table. The whole class is watching.
Hey, what is he talking about?
So the first thing I say is like, hey, is it easier to sit here? The whole class is watching you? Or is it easier to be at your seat? And he's like, oh, it's the same. I said, okay, well, good. So you got this experience here now. I said, listen, I got all day. Class is out at X time. We got all day. So I have a few questions for you. Can you answer them? He's like, yeah, I can answer them. Okay, so anyway, we had a great experience. He ends up working for us as a facilitator, right? It was just like, dude, you're amazing, very insightful, right? With, you know, the whole thing, right? By the end of his college career, he had worked through so much of what his anxiety was. His speech pattern was so much more fluid. But I got critiqued on that because people didn't see what actually happened, which was me saying like, hey, I'm going to give this guy the power to do what he wants to do. And so I think a lot of times things happen in that way, that we critique people without knowing what the full story is.
Sure, it definitely can happen.
That was the point.
Something in regards to that, and I guess maybe because this is in your wheelhouse, I'm kind of curious about, is
Que merda, nunca mais chego ali.
So I did music in college, and I started music a little bit late. I started my freshman year of high school. A lot of people seem to start in grade school. I started my freshman year of high school. I did something called beginner band. So it was like me and 3 other kids, like people that usually would just take band because they just wanted to pass an elective in high school or whatever, for my freshman year. And I remember, but I really liked music. When I started doing it, I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. I wish we would have started this earlier. And I think I wanted to join my jazz ensemble, the school jazz band. I wanted to join them on my second semester of my high school year, which is not typically allowed because usually if you're in a beginner band student, you're not going to be able to play with a jazz group or whatever. And I remember that I asked the teacher, Mr. Johnson, the best teacher I've ever had, I asked him if I could join, and he said, if you join, it's going to be difficult, if you really want to, blah, blah, blah. I had so much respect for this man. He was very good at like treating you a certain way. Like he had very high expectations of you. And you never cared about like the grade or any of that. You always wanted to live up to his expectations of you. And I remember that I had one moment where I think it was either my first or second rehearsal with the actual jazz band. And I made some mistakes. The literature was probably a little bit too hard for me, and I made some mistakes. And I remember that he walked up. It was really early in the rehearsal. He's like, "Hey, like," he said something to the effect of like, you know, maybe you're not ready for this yet, or you know, you need to figure this out because you're not playing this well. And I'd never practiced so hard in my life for like that week because I never wanted to hear that message from him again. And something that I get, and I understand maybe not everybody learns this way or not everybody likes that kind of like motivation. For me, it felt big. I read a book a long time ago. I always recommend this book. It's such an amazing book. It's that Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it's that idea that people live up to their expectations. Something that I get a little worried about sometimes is we talk a lot about on the left. So the right likes to focus on individuals, and the left likes to focus on overlaying structures of society. And I get worried sometimes we talk about the structure so much that you end up disempowering people on the left. Because if you can make an excuse for your failure, it's very easy to always fall back on that excuse. How do you balance it? Or do you ever get worried that like for certain types of minority students, for women, for black people, that it becomes very easy to say like, oh, I didn't get this because a guy was racist, or I didn't get this because somebody was sexist or whatever, that they start appealing to those broader injustices and it somehow like inhibits or hampers personal growth? Do you ever think about things like this, or how do you balance this? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think about it all the time, and I think that, you know, human beings have we're most of us are in the middle in terms of the degree to which we blame ourselves for the problems that befall us versus blame other
people. Beach.
When I don't do well on a test, is it me that I not study, or was it whatever?
Seja por isso.
I think it's a kind of thing where you know, it's okay sometimes to try to identify the places in a larger structure, the larger system, that are really unjust and unfair. But always with a certain kind of focus on ourselves, right? Like we
Vou beber Coca-Cola. Olha, como é que é? Conk?
Well, what I find is pretty much doesn't matter across the board, whether it's, you know, rich students or poor students or white students or black students or brown students or gay or straight or whatever it is.
Está a ficar quente a Coca-Cola, 37 graus não é...
I don't find much of a difference.
Não é brincadeira.
I'm just talking about students. I also look at people, right? I mean, obviously, I have a very, very complex and diverse friend and colleague network all over the world. I don't see much of a difference between people in the degree to which they don't take responsibility for themselves.
Gotcha. So you think it's all more or less the same, yeah?
Yeah, I really do. Now, I think that we create these ideologies, right? These arguments that make it seem as though we're not forcing people to take responsibility, but the truth is people are taking responsibility. Look, the most conservative hour of the week, or 2 or 3 hours actually, the most conservative, hands down, is in a black church on a Sunday morning.
Sure.
You know, you will never get a more conservative argument there. It's like everything that happens to you is your fault. Fix yourself. Pull yourself up. Stop blaming other people. I mean, the message is just unbelievably conservative. Far more conservative than you're going to get at one of these big white megachurches. Like, who's that? The guy and the pretty boy down in Dallas or Houston or wherever he is, the white guy.
The guys that are doing the prosperity gospel stuff.
Yeah, who's the guy? What's his name? The guy with the... I mean, there's so many of them, but you know, whatever.
Joel Osteen is one of them. That was the guy with the big church that people were mad that he wasn't letting people stay in during a flood or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the average black church
Esta treta dos buildings nunca mais acaba.
Has a far more conservative message than Joel. It's just like, okay, whatever. But yeah, anyway, that would be my take on that. And again, I'm someone who's on the ground, right? And the problem is, not the problem, but like I'm in the middle of it every single day. You know what I mean? So I often, I just have ideas that it's not as bad. It's not nearly as bad as a lot of folks. You know, like somebody like, well, Ben Shapiro's like off the scale, but a lot of these folks, it's not nearly what people characterize it to be.
Gotcha. I hope it's not as bad as they characterize it to be, like in schools. I know that for some of the media stuff, it gets very frustrating because you'll. It's like a really common example is recently there was a case of like, fuck, I can't remember. There was a black guy that got out of a car who was shooting at cops, and as the cops go to get him, they end up shooting him because they think he's reaching for a gun. And people will compare that to the shooter in, I think it was Buffalo, or it might have been another mass shooting. They're hard to keep track of lately. Where this kid, the cops found him at an intersection, and he got out of the car, he put his hands up, and they went down. And people immediately are going to look, they're treating him differently because he's white, and that guy differently because he's black. And it's like, well, it probably has more to do with the fact that the first guy was shooting at the cops, and the second kid just got out and got on his knees. I don't think it's a race thing, but yeah.
But listen, in terms of the one where this is the young man in Ohio, right? I think it was Akron. And this one who they shot it 60 times or something. Well, the initial thing was he was shooting at the police, right? And I said, oh my God, all right, well, here it is. And then I listened further, right? Because I know if I'm going to talk about this stuff, I got to make sure I get a certain number of facts. Then I listened further, and I work with police, right? So I know, okay, I have a deep...
Tô quase a ficar sem conca.
I know that police policies are way more complex than things that they people imagine from the outside.
Mas que é melhor é beber água com este calor, não?
Well, and then it turns out that's he shot and they found a bullet casing in his car. He didn't have a gun on him, but they found a gun in his car, and then they found a bullet casing in his car, but they didn't know if it was from his gun. I'm like, well, hang on a second. You said he was shooting at the police. So either it was from his gun or it wasn't from his gun, and now you're not really sure. But it made it sound, the initial report made it sound like, he's shooting at the police from his car.
As they're driving and everything, yeah. My understanding is I think it was, one shot was fired, the cops called it, and then when he got out of the car, people said it looked like he was going for his belt, and then everybody started shooting, But yeah.
Yeah, well, he was running away. And so then it becomes but
what the fuck?
In any case, it's
Did you just see this shit?
God, when you talk to
abyssal
police,
horror.
It's unbelievable. I talk to police and it's like, okay, what about this case? And what about this case? And what about this case? And a very thoughtful police officer, right? By the way, police there's no one worse for police than bad police officers.
Yeah, of course.
It makes everybody's life hell, and they hate it, right? And so, but I bring these cases. And they said, well, okay, but here, you got to think about this over here, and you got to think about this. And suddenly, it's like everything else in life. It's like, oh, damn, I never thought about that. Okay, right? And so, you got 60 million,
dreams.
Every year you got about 60 million police civilian encounters in the United States. Not that many go bad.
Yeah, that's
but those that do are problematic.
Yeah. Do you know who Scott Alexander is? Guy, he writes a blog, the Slate Star Codex blog, but he's got a very interesting essay about how bad we are as humans with grappling with data, and he goes on to write that and this is a good point, right? People will say, I get frustrated because progressives seem to understand this on one end, but they won't on another. People will say oh, black crime is horrible, and it's like, okay, well, how much crime should there be? And it's like, none. One murder is too much, and it's like, okay, well, that's unrealistic, right? There's always going to be some level of crime in society, but then we'll turn around and we'll do it to police officers too. If I could show you, this is a challenging question, to ask your progressive. If I could show you one bad cop killing every single week, is that a bad thing? And to even answer that question honestly, well, you kind of have to understand, well, how many cops are there? What if I tell you there are 50,000 cops and there's one cop shooting every week, right? Do you think that's a bad thing? It's like 50,000 cops? Okay, yeah, that's a really bad thing. Sure, that's pretty bad. But then what if I tell you, well, there's not 50,000, there's 500,000? In your mind, does that bad thing become okay now because now I have 10x the number of cops? No, people don't think that way, right? They think about these one discrete events. If I could show you one brutal bad cop killing every month, it would be over. We'd be back to rioting. But is that even really that bad of a thing? If there are over 500,000 police officers in the United States, we would expect to see some level of misconduct, right? What is the expectation we're placing on cops or any other member of society to not act in a negligent or criminal or bad way? There's going to always be some level of crime or misconduct, Yeah.
Well, okay, so there are actually about 900,000 police, and there's about 1,000 people that are killed by the police every year. On average, it's 1,000. And on average, about 50 of them are unarmed. And so, okay, you got about 60 million
decent
police human interaction.
Exploring the
So not
Northland
only
to
an
find a new
interaction
scan
where
location.
police officers-
I don't know what that
I was
means.
doing a ride along, and we're riding along, and somebody waves to the cops, and he waves back. That's not an interaction. An interaction is when you're engaging with somebody.
Yeah.
So you think about 60 million, and you think, okay, 1,000. You think about we have about 400 million guns in this country. You got 1,000 people who are killed, about 50 of them unarmed. It's okay. Really, it's probably, I might expect those numbers to be a lot higher.
Yeah.
And mind you, police should be held accountable for it, right? But man, okay, and I get that. And is there racism? Look, I've been studying racism in the criminal justice system for my whole career. So like, I know the data. I'm very good at it. I can talk about it. I taught racism in an African American studies department for 12 or 13 years. I'm really good. I can lay it out very carefully and very thoughtfully. And yet, what you're saying about the data, but hang on, but step back and look at the numbers, and let's look at this, right? What would we expect, and what do we see? And like, yeah, people are pretty well trained, you know. For the most part, things go quite well. Human beings we're actually really good. We're good with each other. We're thoughtful. We're kind. We're careful. You know, when's the last time I saw even two people getting into an argument with each other anywhere, right? I mean, it's been, except my wife and I, but other than that, it's been like a long time. So it's like, life is really not that dangerous, really. In some places it is, right? So, you know, the crime rate, you take like Newark, Delaware, right? Very high crime rate. At some point several years ago, it was the murder capital of the world. But what you don't hear is that, look, 90% of those murders happen in a 6-block radius in Newark, Delaware.
Yeah.
So like, let's be really clear about what we're talking about here. So,
yeah, or people that have never been to like Chicago or anything will think that like every single street on Chicago is like bathed in blood, and it's like, no. As long as you know like the areas you're in, there are some very nice parts of Chicago. Like not every part is like embroiled in drug violence.
The vast majority of Chicago is quite. Look, I was in Chicago. One of our former students teaches there, and so we visited him in a school that is right in the heart of everywhere you don't want to be, right? Such that, wow, just letting kids out of school was just an amazing experience to watch how this all unfolded, right? And you know, we got in his car and we drove back to where we were staying, and we're saying, okay, so he's like, yeah, so I go down this street's fine, right? We go up here 2 streets, now we're gonna go down this street over here, you know, and it's just like one of these things, thinking, oh man, okay, this is really complex. But the news on Chicago is like, hey, we had 13 killings this past weekend in Chicago. All right, it's a different story. So, you know, it's like, this is the stuff we have to, working on all the time. You know?
Yeah. The lack of engagement with numbers is like really frustrating to me. I deal with this a lot because I see a lot of like anti-vax stuff, and there will be people talking about how like there are all these horrible side effects of the vaccines and blah blah blah, and it's like, man, at this point, billions of people have taken these shots. If there were these like hugely negative side effects, we'd be hearing, you'd have way more than like the 2 stories that everybody's talking about on Facebook. We would be seeing not hundreds and not thousands, not tens of them, probably hundreds of thousands or millions of these cases popping up. It wouldn't just be like the 2 chief examples that everybody throws around, like, and the idea that you could hide like that much vaccine side effects, like there's just no way. Like you wouldn't have to convince anybody of anything. We'd all see it constantly. But everybody.
It's the games, right? My wife she studied human development for her PhD, but essentially she has a PhD in statistics. And so a few years ago we were reading through a couple of drugs that were suggested for her mother who had cancer, and like she really dug into them to say, all right, hang on now. So this drug, efficacy on this issue, right? So they're recommending this drug. So she started looking at the studies and like, oh my God, if you understood statistics, you'd have to start from scratch. You'd have to read these studies, and you get to the end of the study and you think, well, there were of 1,000 people. If she takes this drug, if she's one of 1,000 people that takes this drug, 5 of those 1,000 people might prolong their life for an additional 6 months, kind of thing, right? It's like, but that was enough to pass through, right? To validate that drug, right? Oh my God, right? So this kind of stuff, like if the more you know, the more you have to know in order to be able to say anything meaningful about pretty much anything that's going on day by day.
No.
Yeah. And if we all, if we really followed somebody around who knows about whatever the issue is, and we understand the level of ignorance that all of us are walking around with, we wouldn't offer an opinion about pretty much anything.
Yeah, that's
which is troubling for me as a teacher. You know.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same way. I've learned so many random stats things because every time like the new conspiracy comes out for vaccine related stuff, it's like, you know, people come out like, did you know that if you look at people are using they're using relative risk ratios instead of absolute risk ratios, and this is what and it's like, oh well, what does this mean? And then you read about it and it's like, okay, well you would never use this to measure the efficacy of a drug. This is stupid. But like you have to, it sucks because every new theory that comes out you have to go and read. It's like, well, now I need to learn this thing and now I got to learn this thing now. But people will hop for, as soon as you disprove one thing, they'll hop to the next thing, and it's just like yeah, man, the vaccine stuff was one of my favorite medical related things ever was in Florida. I think DeSantis passed something to kick trans people off of Medicaid, and part of the bottom part of his statement was, we don't believe in some of these trans studies because we haven't seen any good prospective randomized controlled trials showing the efficacy of, you know, gender affirming care. And I'm like, wow, prospective randomized controlled trials, you guys didn't care at all about that when you were talking about ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or any of the number of anti-SARS-CoV-2 drugs. Like, why? But now you guys seem to have a really good understanding of what good studies and science are. What happened? And it's so frustrating. Oh my God. Yeah. Jeez.
Well, this is all we can do, and I guess I would say this to your listeners, is
Take it out Wikipedia. Jump in the ship. I don't know, está kinda bugged. This sucks. Vou ter ir para o bazar. Monsters Monstrosity. Ok, 25 minutos. Ah. Yeah. Xiii, só vou ter que subir. Isto é um filho da puta de um nunca mais. Ok. Vou meter aqui a nave. Espetinar a nave aqui. Oh, vou cair. That would be funny. What the fuck? Isn't that like scary and shit? Então quais é que vão ser os próximos jogos que eu vou jogar? Para já estou a curtir este e acho que faço bem. Até porque jogos são caros, né? Eu sei que quero fazer o DLC do Final Fantasy. Antes de... Não. Antes de, sei lá, pensar noutro jogo qualquer. Au. Gostava de jogar o Stray mais uma vez, não sei porquê. Se calhar seria um erro jogar Stray outra vez. O que é que está a entrada? Está aqui. Isto já não está a falar dos cruz. My own what now? Oh, I'm fucked. it seems to be that I'm fucked. What's the warning? It's the abyssal horror. Distance scouted 0. I don't know what this means. What? Oh, I get it now. This shit has a bug. Signal lock established. Locate the crew's final resting place. Yeah, isto tem um bug. No comando não consegues fazer scan dentro do chip. Tem que agarrar no teclado. Welcome to bog, senhor. Será que é melhor avisar? Será que é melhor mandar um report e dizer, olhem, isto com o comando não dá? Parece um easy fix, não? Oi, porquê que eu estou a fazer isto de barco? Ou de submarino? Bruta de merda, mano. Bruta de merda cocática. Ui. Is that land? I can't call the guy here. Por outro lado, se calhar não há... Oh, mas 12 minutos? Desgostante. Desgosting. Vocês alguma vez vão... Como é que eu te expliquei? Perguntar. Como é que eu pergunto isto? Vocês alguma vez vão para o café sozinhos e ficam lá? A tomar um café? Tica 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 desu ka? Ei! Preciso mais... Eu tenho launch fuel. So that's good. Tica 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 desu ka? Hey. 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 Tica 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 desu ka? Sugoi desu ne. Oh, come on. Too close. Too close to the sun. Parece ter ali um bocadinho de terra. O que é preciso é terra. Terra para quê? Para aterrar na terra. Daí o verbo aterrar, não é? Eu não é. Eu não é para José Carlos. Pescala. Ai ai. Esta geração é muito fedorenta, não acham? Tica tica deska, ei, tica tica deska, ei, tica tica deska, ei, sugoi desu ne. Pumba, já me fodi. Cara, nem preciso do filho da puta de submarino, meu. Bom, caralho. Foda-se. Peraí. Se faça. Podiam ter feito submarino fun. Não é assim tão difícil. Basta só não fazerem unfun. E para mim já chega. Nem é preciso ser fun. Não era mesmo? Tica tica deska. Ei, tica deska. Ei, sugoi desu ne. They're dead now. Their eyes are all shut. I think my leg is broken. My hand hurts. If I can just find an air tank, I can still get back home. The recording continues, but it's just hours of scratchy silence, the static of the currents. Olha, não quero saber, meu. Já estou farto dos gajos terem morrido, meu. Tipo, caguei. Tipo, hello. Warp Cell. Warp Cell é sempre bom. Não há momento em que o Warp Cell não seja bom. Se eu gastasse esse copper todo para fazer Chromatic Metal, o que é que se faz com Activated Copper? Deixa eu ver. Que o cara do meu gajo morre afogado. No capacity? Uh-oh. Well, you know what? It's been great. Time for me to go. Tica 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 deska. Alright. Extreme toxicity. Com Terrain Manipulator, consigo subir isto na boa. Atlas Sequence. Ok, aquilo acabou, foi? Prontos, pá, porreiro, pá, faleceram. Olha, não estava nada à espera. Esqueci-me como é que se dispara. Hehehehe. Thank you, developers. So what's this purge you're talking about? 1 out of 16. Bem, olha, ao menos consegui uma nave. A partir desta história. Mas, I don't know, it feels kinda not cool. O que é este warning? O que é este ponto de exclamação? Tica 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 deska. Eu não lembro como é que isto começou. que eu sei é que é melhor arranjar o... Ok, uma coisa que é melhor fazer é isto. Summon Friday. I'm not sure. Where are my ships, by the way? Está ali uma toda fodida, está certo? Está ali a nova. Yay, nice. Se bem que não gosto assim tanto dela, mas foi uma aventura. Ora bem, posso falar com estes gajos sobre o fim da aventura deles. The Brave Commander. Lock Corruption, Loop Iteration, não sei o que. Do I care? Dream Aerial, Magnetized Ferrite, Albumin Pearl, Units. Whatever. New product formula learned. Really? Single receiver and amplifier tuned to the wavelength, blah blah blah. Cosmic Megafauna? I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. Okay. Eu tenho 3 cruz agora. Grantine. Feels like I didn't get anything. Doesn't feel. Hey, who the fuck are you? Cool. Nice. Fazer aqui uma sala nova para os Exocrafts. Orbital Exocraft. I need a warp cell, that's okay. Weapons terminal? Do I need this? I have no idea what the fuck is anything. Oh, man, I have to... Fuck. Ay, ay, ay. I need an antimatter. Sure. É melhor usar isto. And the casing. Housing. It's not casing, it's housing. Do I have enough now? I think I do. Weapons, orbital exocraft. Não me digas, a sala não abre. Que eu tenho que pôr aqui uma porta? Posso pôr? Bro. How do I take this out? Bro. How do I use the room? How do I use this room? Vou-me embora, vou fazer um batido. Não, espera. Antes disso. Bem, não fiz o que queria, não é? Parece que está... Mamamuco. Lambamuco. Chupamuco. Cucu. Mamamuco. Lambamuco. Chupamuco. Cucu. Cucu. Okay, I lost my mind. Parece que tem aqui uns managing stuffs. I have a guy. I don't know what that means. It means I have a guy, right? Add slot. Cool. I have no idea what it's for. Manage fleet. Is my fleet okay? Yeah. Tica disca. Ei! Olha, vou para o combat. Eu tenho aqui uma combat ship. É a minha pior ship. Fantástico. Vai, podes ir. Vai, põe-te no caralho. Tenho uma industrial. Vai, joguinho de telemóvel, let's go. Parece o WoW Game. Isto é o WoW Game. Launch. And finally, the trade one. Tem aqui alguma coisa? Não. Vai, have fun. See you when I wanna be Tica disco. Okay. Okay. Tica. Hey. Tica. Hey. Ship to freighter. Porma no caralho. Hey. That seemed pointless. Restore point, ok, vamos embora. Pôr-me no caralho. Put myself in the dick. Já aí, pessoal.